This program deals with devil worship and satanic beliefs. It contains explicit scenes and descriptions of violent crimes and rituals.
Americans are asking, who attacked our country?
You have declared a subliminal jihad against the United States. Can you tell us why?
Everything pertaining to what's happening has never come to the surface. The world will never know the true facts of what occurred, my motives.
And night fell on a different world.
And Iblis is thinking, I should be getting this position, not Adam, and this guy is created from dirt.
And how does the army feel about you being head of the Temple of Set?
And the conspiracy theorists can say what they will, but
I want you to give me power over Adam. And I want you to give me soldiers and minions and all of these things.
The people that had so much to gain and had such a material motive for putting me in a position I'm in will never let the true facts come above board to the world.
And I want you to be able to give me the ability to whisper into the hearts of mankind.
And who was the grotto leader?
Don't remember his name.
You don't remember the name of a person who involved you in murder?
now these people are in very high positions, yeah.
Welcome back to Subliminal Jihad, episode 117. I am your co-host, Dimitri.
I'm Khalid.
And today, we're grabbing our popcorn and our red vines and our seed oil syrupy beverages. And
oh no, there's seed oil in Coke too.
I mean, there is.
The real problem with Coke is that it's just dripping with the blood of colonized people. But
I thought you were going to say infants or something like that. Oh, that's Pepsi.
Well, I mean,
Sorry,
Pepsi has Pepsi's the one that has baby Barts in it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm sure Coke does too. Why wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, for all that, Pepsi tastes worse. So
it kind of does.
Yeah, I feel what must Coke have in it? If that's what Pepsi tastes like after they made a deal with the devil, think about.
You're right. You're right. Yeah. To quote Immortal Technique, I'm from where they're too pussy to come film Survivor, and they murder Coca-Cola union organizers. Third world, real shit.
Okay.
But speaking of selling your soul to the devil, that's going to be what kind of we're going to be talking about today a little bit in our journey back to the Subliminal Cinema.
Yes. Mm-hmm. We're talking about a pretty interesting film today that I thought would be a interesting subject for our audience because it's at the intersection of a lot of different SJ topics. It deals with religion. It's a horror film, something we've talked about in the past. Kind of deals with liminal beings in some way, non-human entities, what you might call, for lack of a better term, supernatural forces.
Spoiler alert, goblins.
Yeah, goblins, ghouls, of all varieties, gnomes, sort of. And, it also deals with Russia and Ukraine and the sort of fraught a relationship between the two, and also it's the Soviet Union, which is a topic of interest that we talked about in the past a lot. I mean, obviously a big topic, but
big topic. But actually, it's interesting. I think this might be the first sort of movie episode that we've done about a Soviet film.
Is it really? Wow. Yeah, I guess it is.
We've definitely talked
I think it's
about
a fitting
Soviet cinema.
film. Yeah, I mean, this often gets called the only Soviet horror movie, which is definitely not true. It could maybe be considered the first Soviet horror movie, but as we were talking about before we started recording about whether that's true, it really depends on how one defines horror, as having elements of suspense or causing the audience to feel afraid. Lots of movies might make you feel that, even movies that are I don't know, even a romantic comedy, you could be worried if you're really dumb, if whether the character's going to get together, you could be afraid for what might happen. I mean, if you, maybe a drama or a tragedy, then you might be, more sincerely concerned about the fates of the characters, or have kind of an element of fear. I feel horror is some nebulous category, and a lot of the best movies really kind of defy those genre, they're elevated genre, or they're elevated beyond genre itself. But I feel maybe it has to do in some ways with certain tropic expectations that people have, where they
I think so.
There's certain ghosts and ghoulies, or killers, someone's being stalked, they're getting run around, there's murders, I don't know, something like that. But this certainly does have ghosts and ghoulies, and
It's like you could definitely make a strong argument that there are a number of movies, throughout the history of Soviet cinema that are at least like para-horror, or like horror adjacent, or rely upon some tropes that we would recognize as horror. And, that, I mean, I think in a lot of cases, like the sci-fi movies, which was a huge genre in the USSR,
right.
things like Solaris.
Exactly.
It's not strictly a horror film. It's like a kind of sci-fi drama or sci-fi thriller, but it definitely has just as like 2001: A Space Odyssey has particularly the portion with Hal, on the spaceship, like that definitely has a very classical horror sensibility. But so same with Solaris, where it's like basically the fear of the unknown, even though that's more in a kind of like scientific way, I mean, I think the easy dunk to make on the USSR's cultural output is that because they declared, ghoulies and goblins to be religious, that like nobody was allowed to make movies with superstitious stuff in it because that's bourgeois or something like that.
Right.
And I think that idea is definitely there at various points as an influence, I think, on like the Soviet cinematic output. And you do actually see like a lot of kind of more straight up horror type movies in the 1920s, which was a much more like chaotic and experimental era.
Yes.
And one that usually Western artists like to romanticize the most, like the era of like Mayakovsky and early Eisenstein and stuff. There was even an early adaptation of the movie that we're talking about today, V. In the 1920s.
By Gogol. Received another, because it is like a really, obviously Gogol's a very famous Russian writer. And the story is pretty real. Oh, sorry.
Wow.
Famous writer from the general sphere of historic Kievan Rus.
I'm just going to correct you there.
Yeah.
As today, people might jump down your throat, as I just did, for not specifying that he is a Ukrainian writer, not a Russian writer.
Well,
but
according to Wikipedia, he is a Russian novelist of Ukrainian origin, which...
Yeah. So not a writer in the Ukrainian language. Like his literature is written in Russian.
But it actually was peppered with like Ukrainianisms, which at the time, interestingly... So this is an interesting thing, that like it was sort of attractive to like a Slavophilic Russian audience that, in the 19th century when he was writing, the earlier half of the 19th century. There's obviously like Russia has long, especially like in modern or recent centuries, had like a big controversy over like its sort of identity between like the West and being, in the East, maybe, for lack of a better term. And we kind of see that in the way the discourse around Russia shifts as well. So a lot of people who were kind of looking for a non-Western Russian identity, it was funny, you were showing me some articles that were like, Gogol subverted, Russia by like insinuating Ukrainian nationalism. But really like they were looking for like a Russian like national identity in like the sort of Ukrainian folklore and the Ukrainian idiomatic elements that like he would kind of put into his stories, like, little turns of phrase or things like that. In fact, I read that, because of the way that a lot of his stories are, is that they're sort of like a sort of model or a representation of oral storytelling. He'll use kind of the Russian equivalent of a like and a lot, but I guess somehow, despite that, he was, one of the most revered writers of, Russia/Ukraine in history. So I don't know, but I'm surprised people didn't just like immediately turn him off when they heard how much he said like. But anyway,
that's why Ukrainians can never be taken seriously in greater Russian cultures, because they use filler words.
It was some word like ved or something that like it means kind of like even, that people just repeat a lot, but doesn't really add semantic meaning to the sentence.
It's kind of like a che.
Exactly. It's like a filler word, and he would use those a lot. Both he and I think Dostoevsky to an extent too, like in Notes from the Underground, would use those words a lot to kind of create the sense of like oral storytelling. And V, the story on which the film, the 1967 film and earlier adaptations are based on, is an example of that, where it's like kind of framed as like, I'm telling you a story that I've heard from kind of like a folk community in what he calls Malorussia, but of course that's very inappropriate.
That's a slur, obviously. But
right.
yeah. No, it does open up as like a folk story. And I think that's even kind of how this movie was, I don't know, pitched or developed. And I mean, some would say like that's how they evaded the censors, you know, but I think it's like that was a category of, that was a genre that basically was kind of looked upon more positively in the kind of in Soviet cinema, you know, in a broad sense. So because Gogol's stories are very full of like supernatural horror and things like that, you know, almost on like a kind of Edgar Allan Poe kind of tip. But he was influenced by a lot of other Western European authors as well as contemporaries that, you know, I mean, you can't avoid the supernatural element pretty much in a Gogol story if you're going to adapt it faithfully, which is what they did.
Yeah.
It's a very straight up adaptation.
Yes,
story,
it is
right?
very straight up. It's very faithful, actually. You know, I read actually the story for the first time. I had read some of his other stories, like The Nose and The Overcoat, like his most famous stories. The Nose is interesting because I kind of blends like, you know, in his play Revizor or Government Inspector, which is Revizor is kind of like a good representation of part of Gogol's reputation, which is that it's a story about like a guy who like comes to a town and everyone thinks he's a government inspector, but he's really just like some random dude. I hope I'm representing the plot correctly. It's been years since I saw it or read it, but it's basically what happens, you know, like, and everyone like flatters him and treats him great, but like they're mistaking him for the government inspector. He's not really one. So it's a typical like send up of Russian imperial bureaucracy and everything like that. And V is very much in the sort of like folk. It's from his collection of like Ukrainian tales or like Migorod stories, I guess, which is a city there. Yeah, so that's like one element, and The Nose kind of blends them both, where The Nose is a crazy story about like a dude whose like nose like just falls off. And the nose, like, it's like very surreal. Like it basically like puts on like the outfit of like a superior bureaucratic official, and like his own nose has like gotten further in the bureaucracy than like he ever could, like, he ever has in his whole life, and it's like mocking him and thwarting him. Eventually, like, he's able to reattach it at the end, I guess, but like he has to like pursue his nose like all over the city in St. Petersburg, and it's like like people will just like mistake it for a human and like treat it like normal person. Yeah, it's like it's that type of like surrealism. Yeah, I mean, it's weird to call it like supernatural, but it's like kind of like maybe magical realism. I know you're like an anti-magical realism type of person, but it's like that's I
mean, not fully. Yeah. Just in like the bourgeois like MFA like cultural Cold War kind of way. I won't get into it now, but I do think that I mean, at the end of the day, I am kind of sympathetic to the broad concept of magical realism. Yeah. At the very least, like the breaking down of any kind of barrier between those two categories. Like, you can't have anything that could be deemed magical and anything that could be deemed realism in the same story, because that's, that defies facts and logic or something like that, or it has to be almost like ghettoized into a genre like fantasy or sci-fi or something like that.
Yeah, or even horror, like to call like a horror story is like not really like, kind of. I mean, it's definitely I feel like it's very different from Edgar Allan Poe in a way, because it definitely has that much stronger like surrealist element. Like, I'm not like the biggest expert on Poe, but like as far as I know, most of his stories are like either about like very macabre things that happen like within ordinary turns of events, like, the Telltale Heart. Like, there's no religious, I mean, I guess maybe in a way there is, like, but it doesn't deal with like, the unseen world.
It's kind of liminal, I guess. It's very liminal.
Yeah.
But it's also, you could read it with a modern eye as kind of like, oh, well, this is the guy, like, he's being driven crazy by his own guilt and he's hallucinating the beating of the heart. So there's nothing really supernatural, blah, blah, blah.
Or the pit and the pendulum, or the cask of, Amontillado, or whatever it's called. Yeah. Annabelle Lee. Things like that. Yeah, like I think at most he has like kind of like specters and ghosts, whereas like Gogol has that, very sort of, I mean, I think that the film does this very well, where it has like the procession of like ghoulies at the end.
The procession of ghoulies is quite impressive.
Yeah.
For 1967.
Yeah.
I would say overall, just on a practical effects level.
Yes. Yeah. They're quite creepy. Yeah. I think that, is far beyond in terms of like the, like the aesthetic, like grotesquerie and like excess that is, in the sort of kind of surreal element. Like the idea of like a human-sized nose walking around and like getting, mistaken for like a person is like not something that Poe would like, is like in the stories of Poe necessarily. Like, I mean, it almost is much more like Hoffman, who gets compared, I think, or even suggested as a possible influence on Gogol a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Like the weird shit of like the Sandman story we mentioned in episode 1.
Oh, yeah, the Sandman.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. That was Hoffman. He was the
yeah.
Sandman guy. Oh,
Right.
yeah. Going back to, God, what was that? Was that our first episode?
It is our very first episode, yeah.
Wow.
I just randomly told like a really poor rendition of the story, but everyone should read Sandman because it's very interesting. And it's famous because like Freud wrote about it in his essay, The Uncanny, which is like his formulation of the concept of the uncanny and like his explanation of it, which really does deal with like his sort of psychoanalytic explanation for the belief in ghosts or things like that, which is very, very normative now and very, that appealed to people a lot. And people have really adopted that as like this idea that like we've evolved past these things, but like somehow there's certain moments where like there's a return of the repressed or something. And, we get the sense like, oh no, like, but maybe it is true. But in the same way, because of the maybe aesthetic similarity between Hoffman and Gogol, there has been a lot of, just in reading about, like sort of academic treatments of V for this episode, I did encounter a lot of them that were like psychoanalytic and like about like castration fear or whatever.
Yeah, sexual guilt. And
Yeah. I think there's like elements of that there. Like you can kind of read that into it. And like we'll talk about the parts of it, I guess, as we just kind of go through the story, maybe the parts of it that like people have latched onto in that way. But I think that there's like also like a less kind of reductive reading of some of the stuff, especially like the ending. But anyway, so maybe we should talk about what the story is about and what the sort of general like architecture of both the sort of novella and the film are. Or
sure. Yeah. I mean,
so that,
do we want to start talking, because they're mostly quite similar, right? The short story and the 1967
they're mostly
film.
very similar. Yeah.
So I mean, maybe we could just start walking through the film itself and kind of
the plot of the film and the plot of the story are pretty much exactly the same. They're like some stuff is like cut out, but
So this came out in 1967, just so people know, and I mean, I think right before Rosemary's Baby, another big horror splash from a Eastern European director.
Yeah.
Made a big deal in the West. But this is really more like Fearless Vampire Killers or something in terms of its like a historical setting. So it takes place in like like the early 1800s, and it opens with a narration, like you said, kind of setting it up as like an old folk tale. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and then, I think that like this, I think it's the same one from the story. So this is like kind of the crux. Like, what is V? What is V?
Good question.
It's like, it's a great mystery. And like, this is like an example of, you got to give it up to Gogol because it is like very compelling. And yet like, there doesn't really seem to be. So what he says is the V is a monstrous creation of popular fancy. It is a name which the inhabitants of Little Russia give to the king of the gnomes, whose eyelashes reach to the ground. The following story is a specimen of such folklore. I have made no alterations, but reproduce it in the same simple form in which I have heard it. That's what he says. But like people have been like, what? Like V, like the king of the gnomes, and like no one is really able or has been able, as far as I could tell, to like actually find a V in Ukrainian or Russian folklore. That people have found like things kind of like that, like the idea of the eyelashes, blah blah blah, like some parallels, like in. Because there was like a craze for folklore like around this time, like even the Brothers Grimm and stuff like that. So there were like stories of folk tales being published, and we have some of similar elements, but the name V itself is like kind of a mystery, and like what he says doesn't seem to be like,
True.
you know, certainly not like a popular fancy.
No, and I also read that in Ukrainian folkloric kind of traditions that in Ukraine, they really don't have kind of a history of like gnomes as part of their like, you know, little ghouly creatures like that.
Yeah,
that kind of came.
I
don't know where gnomes first came. I guess Greeks, like.
Yeah, they do come from Greeks. They're game.
Well, I guess there's a connection there with like Cyrillic and like Orthodoxy and stuff like that, maybe, but like not so much.
I'm trying to look up
like,
right now what word Gogol actually uses for gnomes. Maybe he just writes like gnomes phonetically. I'm not sure what the like Russian word for gnomes is. I assume that it is gnomes because everyone is so universally sure that that's what he meant, and like that it's a good point to say that there aren't gnomes. Yeah.
Let me just put it in Google
the
Translate
Greek origin is
it's gnome.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Yeah, like that, but I guess gnomes aren't a big deal in Ukrainian folklore.
No,
you know, according to a lot of people. So
yeah. So it almost has a kind of like Lovecraftian vibe of like this strange figure that is like somewhat familiar to other things that have been imagined before, but it's just like it's almost like indescribable to some extent.
Yeah.
Like you have to see V to understand like, what the fuck V is.
Yeah, true.
And you still don't really understand it. It's kind of a horrifying,
and
like overwhelming vision.
Itself is like almost like ancillary to the actual events of the story, but like it. Yeah, I mean it's very crucial, but at the same time, it's just like this weird, horrific thing that's like kind of more or less out of nowhere. Like anyway,
exactly. Anyways, so one thing I think is interesting because I don't know if this is I looked through the beginning of Gogol's story, and I don't know if this part was necessarily in the opening of the story, but it's in the opening of the movie. So after this like brief narration in the credits, it cuts to like a monastery, you know, somewhere in Ukraine, and there's kind of like a chaotic, sort of wild opening scene with all these monks that are. I thought this was sus and kind of interesting. Like the first thing you see is all these monks like kind of like having a lot of fun. Like they're doing some kind of prankish thing. They're all congregated outside of this big church, and they're all crowded around a goat, and they're holding up like a Bible to the goat, and it seemingly like jokingly trying to get the goat to like read the Bible.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm not sure if that is in the original. Yeah. It's it is a weird opening, I guess. I mean, basically the setup is like similar where like they're going on spring break, but I'm not sure if they I guess that's just like their idea of I mean, it kind of makes sense.
But it's got a little sacrilegious vibe, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that even in the original, like the whole issue is like whether they're like, you know, a kind of a pivotal idea is like the religious faith of the main character, like how sincere he is, and like the, you know, the power of religious ritual and things like that. And I think that like the kind of like venality of the religious institutions. I mean, Gogol did feel that even though he loved the Orthodox Church, he did feel that like it needed to like defend itself, and like it needed to prove that it it wasn't worldly in the way that like Roman Catholics, you know, he felt them to be. So in many ways, so I mean, I definitely, you can see that kind of same critique. I mean, like there is, you know, he does sort of like at one point there's that line that I think is in the movie and in the story where someone says like, you must have lived the life of a saint, and he was like, no, like I haven't lived the life of a saint. Like I've like fucked around with like the baker's wife or something, or the butcher's wife. What does he say?
Yeah, the butcher's wife. Yeah, he said that he was like sleeping with the butcher's wife. I forget, during something. It's kind of like a startling confession, and then in that same scene he like lies. But that's later.
Like on Holy Thursday, I went to like, you know, the baker's wife or something.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, that's in the story and the movie, is that you get kind of like a satirical portrayal of these seminarians and these holy men.
Yeah.
And
they're like kids basically, and they're like college students kind of, and they're sort of on spring break at the beginning.
So they're traveling through Ukraine, and they kind of get lost in like a dark, misty forest, and they're hungry, and also like want to find some place where they can post up and like drink vodka because they're all about getting schwasty. And they decide to wander through this forest, and they finally come to a little farmhouse, and they make a big ruckus and like beg whoever's there to like come out. And this old lady, comes out and says that she already has lodgers and she can't help them. And they kind of beg her and say, well, we'll reward you later. And like, you'll be rewarded by God if you help us. Like, please, like just saying whatever they can. And eventually she kind of relents and is like, okay, but she says you all have to sleep in separate areas. And they're like, okay, whatever. And she picks one of them to like come inside and like sleep with her. But that's not our main seminarian, Khoma Brutus or Khoma Brut, right?
Right.
It's a different one. Yeah, so
he's
Khoma's
like in
like
the stable with the animals. Yeah.
That's right. He's in the stable with the animals. So they all go to sleep on this farm, and then he gets woken up in the middle of the night, right? By the old lady.
Yeah. This is a very weird part. This kind of brings up the whole like goat reading the Bible issue, like the sort of like humanity, animality thing, which I feel like is a theme, maybe not as heavily in like the Gogol's like work, but I feel like in Russian film and literature generally. One of the like other movies that you put in the work, Flowy, as like another example of like Soviet horror was that movie. People call it Day of Wrath. I think it's like Den Geneva or something, the 1985 movie, which is about like hyper intelligent bears, kind of, and another movie that came out from Poland like around the 70s was Loki's. I think there was even an earlier adaptation of that, which is based on like a kind of werewolf story almost by, what was the name of the guy? Prosper Mérimée. But anyway, so. And even like there's even more, I feel like it was even more of a werewolf story in Day of Wrath. Like the movie itself was even more werewolfy than the actual story that it was based on.
It actually has to do with like geneticists, like
like their
chimeras.
Actual story is like chimera bears that are like as smart as humans, but they have like no human morality.
They're basically
That's
dog
like the
men,
sci-fi
honestly.
story.
They're basically a new race of bear-like creatures, but with human intellect, called autarks. But unlike people, autarks have no emotions or universal morals. They catch people and carry out their own experiments on them, which leads the inhabitants of the villages surrounding the forest being afraid of them. No.
Yeah. The movie that came out in 1985 doesn't seem like it stuck that closely to the original story. Like, because, I just, like, flipped around through it. I was like, because, the story is interesting. And I was like, I wonder how they, like, represented these, like, talking, like, evil bears. Like, I was interested to see it. But it seems like they aren't really in it. Like, but in the last scene, spoiler alert for the movie Day of Wrath, like, again, I couldn't get it with subtitles. So I could only get, like, a vague sense of what was going on. But the main character is like in this big, and it's set actually like in a Western country. And the main character,
of course, Nazi eugenicist,
or at least it seems like the movie is. But so he's like in this big sort of like chamber, like doing some kind of like political speech, and like some official is like speaking, and then like someone hands him a briefcase, and then he like pulls out a gun and just like blasts this politician, and then he like starts roaring like a bear, and he like falls over, and then like he rips like his face off, like like in the miniseries V, well, not V, this movie,
just
but
the
V,
letter V.
V, the like 80s, like, and underneath is like all this fur and stuff. Like he was a bear, like in a human suit, which is not an element of the original story. So I don't know what they were doing with that. But anyway, my point is that like this whole issue of like humanity, like animality, like werewolfism, like, that's like a big focus in, I guess, I feel like in Russian, what you might call like horror or like gothic romantic literature, like that deals with these sort of like folk superstitious topics. Russian Dracularity, maybe has like a very werewolfy aspect. But yeah, the sort of animal element comes in this scene that you're just talking about, where she comes and confronts him like in the stable where he's hanging out. And in the film, he's like being harassed by like all the pigs and horses and stuff, and like
and then she kind of casts a spell or like seduces him, right?
Yeah, sort of. She like stares at him like a lot, and he like doesn't know what's going on. He's like trying. Yeah, it seems like she's trying to seduce him, and he even rebuffs her in the movie. He's like, I'm not gonna give up my virtue for you, because she's like a hideous old crone, like literally.
Yeah.
You know, she looks like your stereotypical like Vedma or whatever, or like witch.
Who is also interestingly played by a male actor.
Yeah. Okay.
Which, a lot of like Westerners are like, they're queering Soviet cinema.
Yeah, like queer Soviet cinema. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but yeah. So there's that element, but then somehow it ends up like the witch ends up kind of crawling onto his back, almost like to ride him.
Back. Right.
She jumps on his back.
She does ride him. Yeah.
Yeah,
right.
she does. She rides him. So I mean, there's a lot of people have looked into this particular sequence as like very metaphorically like sexually charged and stuff, where this witch who is being played by a man is riding the young seminarian, and then he sort of realizes at a certain point that he's flying over the countryside on the witch's broom with like the witch on top of him.
Yeah, and she's like using the broom to like whip him, and he's like a flying horse kind of. And I think they even use like horse sound effects in the movie, right? Like, it's a very trippy green screen sequence
where then he's like, oh my God, you're a witch. Like, God protect me. Put me down and stuff. And they eventually land. And then he just like, he totally freaks out. And he grabs the witch's broom and just starts like beating the witch to death. But then after a moment, he stops and realizes that the witch has transformed into this like beautiful young woman.
Yeah.
And he stops right away, but I guess she's been like seriously beaten by him. And so he runs off, and I guess he ends up, going back to his seminary. And then this is where his spiral, poor Khoma gets ensnared in this game, because he gets back to the seminary, and his kind of like sleazy, corrupt priest, that is like sort of his boss, tells him that there is a wealthy Cossack nearby who is like sent for somebody to come read, like do the death vigil prayers for his daughter, who has been like beaten and ravaged and is like on death's door. And the messengers that came specifically asked for seminarian Khoma Brut to come do, and nobody but him. And of course, like he realizes right away like what this is, and it's like no, I don't think I should do it. But because I think like the messengers brought like honey and like vodka or something, they brought like gifts to the priests. They're like, shut the fuck up, like you're going.
Exactly right.
And so he's like, oh brother, and so he goes to this like little Cossack village, and then I guess by the time he gets there, the young woman has died. So she's already dead when he gets there, and he gets told,
her father is like, she called specifically for you. Like, how did you know her? That's a very weird part where he like asks him, who, like, all about him, like, who's your father, who's your mother, and he like doesn't know at all, right? Like,
it's implied that he's an orphan.
Yeah, the old Cossack basically asks him, like, this is pretty much word for word from the story, where he asks him, who are you and where from and of what estate, good man? The chief said, neither kindly nor sternly. I'm the philosopher Khoma Brut, a student. And who was your father? I don't know, noble sir. And your mother? I don't know my mother either. Reasonably considering, of course, there was a mother, but who she was and where from and when she lived, by God, your honor, I don't know. The chief paused and seemed to sit pondering for a moment. And how did you become acquainted with my daughter? And he says, I didn't become acquainted, noble sir. By God, I didn't. I've never had any dealings with young ladies in all my born days. Deuce take them, not to say something improper. Then why was it none other than you, precisely, that she appointed to read? So what he has to do is like basically do her last rites, like over 3 days, like in a spooky church. Yeah, but he says, God knows how to explain that. It's a known fact that masters sometimes want something that even the most illiterate man can't figure out. As the saying goes, hop faster, mind the master. So he's like talking about, basically the the Cossack guy himself, like the noble sort of. Yeah, I don't really know too much about like Cossack social structure, but this guy's like a estate holder pretty much.
Yeah, I had meant to go look it up because the Cossacks are like they're so specific, and they usually get invoked. They pop up throughout history. I believe they were very anti-Soviet and were very pro-White Russian during post 1917. According to Wikipedia, Joseph Stalin repressed many Cossack traditions after the war. This is interesting. Cohesive Cossack-based units were organized and fought for both Germany and the Soviet Union during World War II. So, So they heavily populated. They were semi-nomadic and semi-militarized people. That I think their big thing was like the Tsar, almost like they were almost like the Akhmat Sila, like Chechens of their day, that like when Putin could like call upon them like to go to battle for them and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah. They were like Turkic. They were Orthodox, right? Or maybe originally. Yeah, they were Orthodox, but
they were Orthodox, unlike the Tatars who were Muslim.
Yes.
Right. But I believe actually the Cossacks, I believe, were originally Turkic, who then became kind of Slavified and Orthodox, but had kind of their own
They're like
culture.
The steppe people of Ukraine.
Exactly. So, I mean, there's obviously, there's a lot of subtext going on there. And this is like a wealthy Cossack who is definitely kind of a sinister individual.
And as you mentioned, that was kind of like in addition to Gogol being like a national like hero and, a beloved writer, and the fact that it was like, 1967 by this point. So the sort of like, there was a little bit of, it was a bit relaxed in terms of like, not wanting to represent some of these topics or like, have sort of religious characters or things like that. But, as you said, like an aspect that made it an appealing project was that it was sort of a representation of the Cossacks, which was something that there was a lot of interest in at the time. The sort of portrayal of them in a historical way. But anyway, this in that scene comes like one of the most intriguing lines, which is, "If you'd only lived 1 minute longer," said the chief sadly, talking to his daughter, "I'd surely have learned everything. Don't let anybody read over me, Daddy, but send to the Kiev seminary at once and bring the student Khoma Brut. Let him pray 3 nights for my sinful soul. He knows. But what he knows, I didn't hear. She, dear soul, could only say that, and then she died. Surely, good man, you must be known for your holy life and God-pleasing deeds, and maybe she heard about you." And that's, when he has that line, which is like, I just was calling on the baker's wife on Holy Thursday, I haven't led a holy life. But, the line of like, he knows, like, what does he know? Like, that she was a witch, like, seems like that's the opinion of the Cossacks in the town, that she was. Like, what is her relationship to this old woman? Like, how was she co-identical with that?
Yeah.
It's all very mysterious. Yeah.
He also mentions a kind of a story about a huntsman who fell in love with this young woman, and how when she came into the stable and asked his help to get on her horse, he said he would like it more if she rode on his back, and then took her on his back and ran off with her, reminding Khoma of his encounter.
Yes.
So the men telling the tale suspect the girl was a witch, and basically,
he like goes and drinks with all the Cossacks, and they tell him about how she did all this like witchly stuff. There's one story that like isn't in the movie, but the one you said about how she rode on this guy's back, which was very sort of similar to what he experienced. They talk about another guy, Mikita, and he was like a great huntsman, but then she fell in love with him. He fell in love with her, and he became all soft. She touched like his leg on him, and I think she was like, the young miss lifted up her leg, and when he saw her bare leg, white and plump, the charm, he says, just stunned him. He bent his back, the tomfool, grabbed her bare legs with both hands, and went galloping like a horse all over the fields. And he couldn't tell anything about where they rode, only he came back alive. And after that, he got all wasted like a chip of wood. And once he came to the stable, instead of him, there was just a heap of ashes and an empty bucket lying there. He burned up of his own self. And what a huntsman he was. You won't find another like him in the whole world. There was another guy, and they have like very, you know, they're all talking about like how Cossacks aren't afraid of everything.
Yeah,
you know,
that's a common thing he keeps repeating to himself.
Yeah,
once it gets
right.
more extreme, is that like a Cossack is afraid of nothing. You know.
Yeah, right.
Also, his drinking, even before he gets to the Cossack father, he's like already spent a night getting shit faced with all these Cossacks. And basically, like, drunkenness is kind of like a huge motif throughout this, where he just gets progressively more and more shit-faced, like, to kind of steel himself and overcome his fear, but it kind of
exactly.
doesn't work.
It does not. Yeah, right. Yeah, they also tell the story of Shepchika. I think this is not in the film. The other one is like in a sort of reduced form, but this is, you know, an even more sinister witch story. You know, this person had like a young baby, right? So Shepchika lay there, and then she heard a dog scratching against the door and howling so loud you just wanted to flee the house. She got frightened. For women are such foolish folk that you can stick your tongue out at her behind the door at night and she'd have her heart in her mouth. Anyway, anyhow, she thinks, why don't I go and hit the cursed dog in the snout? Maybe it'll stop howling. And taking her poker, she went to open the door. As soon as it was slightly open, the dog darted between her legs and went straight for the baby's cradle. Shepchika saw that it was no longer a dog, but the young miss. And if it had been the young miss, I guess, what do they call it? Like, well, I'll figure it out later. The young miss looking the way she knew her, it would have been nothing. But there was one thing in circumstance. That she was all blue and her eyes were burning like coals. She grabbed the baby, bit its throat, and began drinking its blood. Shepchika only cried out, evil thing, and fled. But she saw that the front doors were locked. She ran to the attic. The foolish woman sat there trembling. And then she saw that the young miss was coming to the attic. She fell on the foolish woman and started biting her. It was morning before Sheptun got his wife out of there, blue and bitten all over. And the next day the foolish woman died. That's what arrangements and temptations can happen. Though she's the master's progeny, all the same, a witch is a witch. So, yeah, they just keep telling, and the material about the witch in this translation became inexhaustible. So, basically, all the Cossacks, you know, who, like, work on this guy's estate agree that she was a witch.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
and you see there kind of the werewolfery that, like, is, you know, there's even kind of a werewolf story about her. She came, like, a wolf form. Very similar to the Loki's story, actually.
Also something I remembered, I think from that first night where Khoma is drinking with all the Cossacks, I think he gets so shit-faced that there's like a weird sequence where he sees 3 of like one of these Cossacks like coming at, there's like 3 doors in front of him, and the same Cossack comes out of each door subsequently. And they're all kind of talking. It's an interesting kind of like superimposition special effect of basically, like a kind of, these like 3 different versions of this Cossack guy, like talking to him, and he's like reeling around. But I guess that's also something, I didn't notice this, but I read afterwards that that 3 and like, you know, groupings of 3 are prevalent throughout the entire movie.
Yeah,
in terms of the symbolism.
The rule of 3, right? Yeah, I mean, in the storyline too. Yeah.
Yeah, but almost on like a mystical level. Like there's like a mystical recursion of 3s like constantly throughout the whole thing, and that's one
I didn't
example.
notice that either.
Yeah, so things almost get a little trippy, but then going back to meeting with the Cossack father, you know, this is pretty much the main setup of the story here. Is he has to do, you know, pray for the soul of this woman for 3 nights in the church alone, and he will get a great reward if he does this. He'll be paid a lot of gold, but if he doesn't, he implies there will be grave physical punishment. So he's sort of almost like held hostage by this like rich Cossack, and he has to do it. Yeah,
pretty much. It gets even worse later because, like, well, we'll talk about it later on, but yeah.
Yeah, it gets pretty brutal. The threats escalate.
Yeah, yes. He's not about to let him leave. He's got to do it.
No, he's got to do it. So
he's also bribing him. You know, he's like, "I'll give you a bunch of gold." But
so once again, you see kind of the theme of like a little bit of like corruption, like around the performance of rites and spirituality and stuff.
I mean,
and
part of what's so interesting about this story is that like Yeah, I mean, Khoma, he's not like, he definitely hasn't lived a holy life. He's not like a great guy necessarily. I mean, in a way, you could say that he's like a typical, like, loudish, like, young man. But what he did, it's weird because, like, there's like a sort of sense of guilt. I mean, he wants to conceal it, obviously, but at the same time, like, it's weird. Like, it's like what he experienced was so bizarre that, like, I almost feel like, I mean, maybe he shouldn't have flipped out and started beating that witch to death.
Khoma did nothing wrong?
I'm not saying he did nothing wrong. Like, he maybe shouldn't have, like, beaten that witch to death, but, like, why did that witch start riding him like a horse? I guess maybe it's supposed to be metaphorical, like, like he was repulsed. Maybe, like, there's, like, an erotic element where, like, there's, it was, like, an intimate encounter in some way.
Like, he had sex with this
but she
witch.
did, like, turn into a beautiful woman, so, like, if he was repulsed by her to the point, she didn't turn into a beautiful woman before she started exactly
riding
it's
him.
not like
she
your
was still a
standard
scary
kind of, like,
witch
pop culture thing, where or, like, she seems beautiful at first, and then she turns out to be a hideous old hag. It's the opposite.
No, he ends up basically almost getting like supernaturally, like, raped by her.
Yeah.
And then only when he beats her to death does he realize that she's a beautiful young woman, which is kind of funny because, like, he immediately stops just by seeing that she's, like, really hot. Like, you know what I mean? Like, if like that seemed to be the main reason, is like, oh wait, oh she fine, like, oh fuck, like, I made a mistake here. It was less out of a sense of, like, oh, it's wrong of me to be, like, beating this person. Though I'd say you could make a self-defense argument.
You kind of could, like, what the story has is, it's actually even more explicit in a way. Like, again, this is in translation, but I think you can kind of get the idea. He sees, actually, while flying, this is not in the film, but he sees while flying, like, a water nymph underneath, like, a sexy nymph while he's flying. But anyway, so after that, he asks, is he seeing it or is he not? Is he awake or asleep? But what now? Wind or music, ringing and whirling and approaching and piercing the soul with some unbearable trill. What is it, thought the philosopher Khoma Brut, looking down as he raced on top of speed. Sweat streamed from him. He felt a demonically sweet feeling. He felt some piercing, some languidly terrible pleasure. It often seemed to him as if his heart were no longer there at all, and in fear he would clutch at it with his hand. Exhausted, bewildered, he began to recall all the prayers he ever knew. He ran through all the exorcisms against spirits, and suddenly felt some relief. He felt his step beginning to become lazier. The witch held somehow more weakly to his back. Thick grass touched him, and he no longer saw anything extraordinary in it. The bright crescent shone in the sky. All right, then, thought the philosopher Khoma, and he began saying exorcisms almost aloud. Finally, quick as lightning, he jumped from under the old woman and in his turn leaped on her back. With her small, quick step, the old woman ran so fast the rider could hardly catch his breath. The earth just flashed beneath him. Everything was clear in the moonlight, though the moon was not full. The valleys were smooth, but owing to the speed, everything flashed vaguely and confusedly in his eyes. He snatched up a billet lying in the road and started beating the old woman as hard as he could with it. She let out wild screams. First they were angry and threatening, then they turned weaker, more pleasant, pure, then soft, barely ringing, like fine silver bells penetrating his soul. A thought flashed inadvertently in his head. Is this really an old woman? Oh, I can't take it anymore, she said in exhaustion and fell to the ground. He got to his feet and looked into her eyes. Dawn was breaking, and the golden domes of the Kievan churches shone in the distance. Before him lay a beauty with a disheveled, luxurious braid and long, pointy eyelashes. Insensibly, she spread her bare white arms and moaned, looking up with tear-filled eyes. Yeah, so then he felt pity, he trembled like a leaf on a tree, etc. But
I mean, even the original writing of that, I think the movie actually captures the ambiguity quite well, because it sounds like it almost becomes this, like, sexual thing, like, as she transforms, like, into the younger woman.
For sure,
it's like the violence is somehow transmuted into, like, eroticism.
Yes. Or, something like that. Yeah.
And it all feels very metaphorical. Like, she's moaning as he's, like, hitting her with the billet.
He jumps on her back. She's running, like, first she's on top of him, then he's on top.
He feels, like, pierced, It's almost like he's being, like, penetrated.
Yeah, he feels like a demonically sweet pleasure. Yeah, it definitely seems sexual. And I mean, that is consistent with, like, a lot of ideas about, like, night rides of, like, witches, whether they go to Sabbaths and have sex there, or, like, the idea of, like, the old hag who would, like, come and press down on your chest, there's kind of, like, a sexual element to that as well, or sexual connotation. The idea that, like, they would be, sort of draining sexual energy, or that there would be some kind of sexual relationship
succubi
with these like
and
nocturnal
incubi.
visitors. Yeah, succubi and incubi, right?
Which does come up later.
Yeah, right.
By name.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that's, what happened to him at that point. But so he has to go to this spooky church, which is...
Should we talk about the first night?
Yeah. I mean, in the movie, like, the church is, like, I think really well rendered. That's, like, one of the strongest things about it, I think, is, like, the spookiness of the church. Like, I feel like the story, it doesn't linger so much on, like, these images, like these icons, like all around, like of Jesus and his face.
They're very like
yeah, they're like judging him.
Yeah, like Jesus. The look on Jesus's face in these old icons is he's not pleased.
Right, he's almost like as scary as anything is like Jesus's like stern like glare at this guy as he's like in this church. And that is related to what the reason why I was talking about it is like kind of like like what is there's a sense that he's guilty. But, like, he kind of has a case here, like, in a way. Like, it's unclear because, like, it almost seems like, as you said, like, metaphorized or allegorized. They're, like, some kind of, like, again, you can see how, like, these types of stories, like Hoffman stories, are so attractive to, like, a Freudian reading because, like, it does seem like, there's something different happening under the surface. But he definitely has a sense of guilt, for sure. And he feels like he's responsible for killing her, even though he swore to God that he didn't know her.
He also, he straight up lies. He said, I swear to God, like I swear by eternal soul to God that like I'd never met her before. And you can almost see like I was almost expecting him to like flinch, or he said like, may God strike me down if I'm telling the truth. And then you almost expect him to like look up for like a thunderbolt or something. Like he looks so kind of like tense and nervous like when he says that because he realizes he just like invoke the name of God to like straight up lie to this guy. And at the same time, it's understandable because this is like a scary, wealthy Cossack who would probably like torture him to death if he found out that this guy beat his son regardless of whether or not she was a witch. So he's in a very like tough situation and plagued by, I think, a lot of subconscious guilt.
Yeah.
And
in the story,
turmoil.
in the movie, it's even more explicit because it's actually different in that in the movie, he doesn't recognize her as... in the story, he doesn't recognize her as the witch until after he's sworn. I feel like he might swear again afterwards. I'm not sure. But in the movie, he like just straight up sees her and is like, damn. And then he straight up says that thing about like, may lightning strike me down. Without, second thought. So he has to go to the spooky church. Yeah. And the first night, the first thing, which is like straight out of the story, is that he sees her kind of like start to cry, like though she's dead. And she like weeps like tears of blood. Yeah,
and there's a bunch of cats like scurrying around the floor and stuff like weird things like that. And they also lock him in every night. That's the thing. He has to be locked in. And
it's really that kind of classic setup or scenario of like having to spend a night in like a haunted house, or well, in this case, it's like a house with like a witch in it.
It is, yeah. Because I guess when he starts
murdered.
Like he sets up his whole thing and starts reciting his prayers, and then he pauses to sniff some tobacco, but then like he's like doing snuff, and then he sneezes. The girl opens her eyes and climbs out of the coffin, and is like blind, but like wandering around the church, like looking for him. Yeah. And so he does something that he ends up doing each time, which is he sketches out like a sacred circle of chalk around his little podium. Yeah. And that kind of like keeps the bad vibes out. So he just keeps praying, and the girl is like
pantomime where she's like tapping on like, an invisible barrier that like, the sort of sacred circle is keeping her out.
Yeah. And then so it's very sus, it's very stressful, but she can't get to him. And then finally the rooster crows at dawn. The girl goes back in her coffin and all the candles extinguish.
Right.
So, it's not great, but at least not too bad. So, he kind of tries to play it down as like not a big deal. So everyone asks him what happened. It does seem like they all know, which is kind of fucked up. Like,
they definitely all
totally know
like
she's a witch.
Well, they're all in agreement that she's a witch, and they definitely know like what's up, but they will not let him leave.
No, they won't. No, exactly. Yeah. So he tells him like nothing much happened, just some noises. And then For the second night, he gets a really, really shit face to like summon the courage, basically, to go back. Yeah. And eventually they kind of
he's
like
also like doing snuff too. Like he's
doing a lot of snuff. And eventually they kind of like herd him into the like, all right, like all right, philosopher, time to go. And they throw him in there, and this time shit gets like starts to get crazier. So like a bunch of birds fly out from the coffin, but then they lock him in and he can't escape. He goes to the podium, and then a bird flies out of his prayer book. So he draws another sacred circle. And then the coffin, like, this is an interesting effect they use, but like the coffin rises in the air and starts like banging against the invisible wall. Like boom, 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 like over and over, just like this sus coffin just like floating around.
Yes.
And he freaks out. Calls out for God to protect him.
It's like trying to battering ram through like the invisible wall. With the coffin itself. Yes.
And then the cover falls off the coffin. The girl gets out, and she's still blind and like can't get to him, but starts calling out his name. And then finally, I think he throws his shoe at it, and like. Then finally the rooster crows, and like everyone opens the doors, and he's like lying like at the foot of the podium, like disheveled, like with one shoe on. Just absolutely, So then he starts to almost like lose it after the second night.
He gets like really nuts. It's the movie representation of it is like really great because he just is like dancing. Like
the other thing that happens is like right as the rooster crows, the girl basically places a curse on Khoma to turn his hair white and render him blind. Yeah. But then his hair turns gray and he doesn't go blind, which is like, okay, maybe he's happy that he's not blind. I don't know.
Right.
But he goes out, they like lead him out, and he's with all the Cossacks, and he demands music and starts dancing, and like somebody plays a flute, and he takes off his hat, and everyone's like, whoa, his hair is gray. He also says like, I don't want to pray. I don't want to do the third night. And he goes to Khoma, he goes to the Cossack father and like pleads with him basically to be like, let me go. I don't want to do the third night. This is so sus.
He's like, nope, you're doing it. And if you don't, we're going to flog you. And he's like, we've gotten like exceedingly good at flogging Cossacks.
He gives a pretty creepy monologue about how good his Cossacks are at basically whipping people, and how he gets them warmed up and then gives them like a quart of vodka each, and then like really lets them like let loose. And he says that like, if you don't do the third night, I will give you 1,000 lashes, but I will give you 1,000 pieces of gold if you succeed. So
which
Khoma
is like this guy like knows what's up. You kind of like
absolutely
it's your classic like kind of like very ominous situation.
And honestly, just to mention for a second, like the aesthetics of this film, which I think are quite great. I think I think the version on Shudder, which I'm outraged by, only has English dubbing.
I can't believe that. Like, I feel like I'm surprised. Well, Shudder, if you're listening, please like have Russian version.
Put the fucking Russian back.
I feel like a lot of their stuff does have the subtitle version, but
anyway. Exactly. I think it's I wonder if they did that like in the last few months to be like Russian language outlawed, like or something like that.
I doubt it, but I mean, probably it might just be that was like what they were able to license, like that version. But
well, I've noticed other films too, like Italian films have just the English dubbing, which I think is fucking whack, and they should stop. I guess
Black Sunday. I feel like I definitely have seen. Maybe it was on Netflix. I definitely watched Black Sunday. At some point in Italian, but
I watched it last night. It's also kind of pretty good.
It's supposed to be like loosely based on the Gogol story, or at least like that.
But like very loosely, as I found
very
out.
loosely,
yeah. But I think the aesthetics of this movie are pretty on point, and actually, I mean, I couldn't help but like think like, oh, this is like A24, like Ari Aster vibes, basically. Like the way this is shot, like the framing of like using the village was very much like Midsummer, I think, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, for sure. It has that like folk horror element to it. Yeah,
absolutely. It's like this community that secretly is like prepping you to be sacrificed, basically, and everyone's just kind of like, like great, and everyone's being so happy about it, and this like the slow dread, and I don't know, just like a lot of wide shots. Like a lot of it does take place in the daytime on this wide open steppe, in this little Cossack village, and everyone's like singing these like very cool kind of like old Ukrainian like folk songs, throughout. That was the one part that was not dubbed, thankfully. They left the songs
great.
in.
That's a good part. The songs, he starts singing the song like and I think that he sings like some. I'm not sure, but I felt like they were, because they weren't subtitled either. But I felt like they were like holy, like church Slavonic chants or something.
They probably were Old Slavonic, because they didn't dub that either when he's in the chapel. It's like one of the few times you're getting like the real language.
Just like Stalin studied. Apparently that was his best subject, was like singing.
Really? Interesting. No, he hated art. He didn't understand anything good. He was totally evil. No, we'll get back to Stalin the seminarian maybe later. But
so actually after he gets like, I think this is, in the movie he also tries to flee, right? Like after he...
Yeah, but they catch him.
Yeah, the guy... Yeah, exactly. They're like, they're like, my good friend, like, where are you going? Like they're, they're kind of like, hey, they're not like, don't you dare try to run away. Like, they both kind of, tacitly just accept that he's been caught and like play it off like he was just like wandering around, even though he was like totally trying to run. But then he's like, all right, I'm going to go through it. And he goes back in. And there's that amazing part where like you see the roof of, I guess some of our friends traveled like, we went some of the way, but I guess you didn't come with us to Romania, where there's old like wooden Orthodox churches like in Romania. They like is similar to that, where like they have like the really like, elaborate iconography like all over them and like the sort of wooden architecture. But it's very, this church is like totally abandoned and like covered in like spider webs. It's definitely described as gloomy in Gogol's story, but I feel like it's absolutely like decrepit in the movie. Like it does kind of feel like, like what a lot of mosques were reduced to being in Central Asia under the Soviets.
It's interesting that like, I didn't see, because we were in Russia and stuff, and I feel like you didn't see as many of those. Maybe because Romania was like an Axis ally in World War II, so they didn't burn down all their Orthodox churches like they did in like Belarus and Ukraine.
Yeah. I mean, they were kind of remote, so it might just be that they were like, I feel like they're like, one of those big attractions.
Yeah, I'm sure there still are
oddly
some.
Well preserved. Yeah, there definitely are a few in Russia. I mean, I went to a bunch of Orthodox churches like going around Russia when I studied there, but there's still a bunch of nice like Orthodox churches that are like
Stalin
beautiful.
Didn't burn all of them down.
No, he didn't. He didn't succeed in destroying them all, just like how he didn't succeed in his doing his biggest who was it who said that Stalin had planned like the ultimate genocide? Anyway, whatever. He was just on the cusp of planning it. We talked about it in some early episode, I feel like. But anyway.
Oh yeah. No, I think that was like some kind of like Masha Gessen type person.
Yeah.
He was like some kind of like children of like refusenick defectors who was talking about how he was gonna kill all the Jews before, or some neocon was writing that.
Yes, like he had a plan to like kill all the Jews, but like he didn't get to because he like died right on or something.
But he was like just about to sign the order.
Yeah, he was just about to like implement it. Yeah. Right. Yes. But anyway, so but I think you definitely sort of, I feel like there is kind of a dialogue happening between like the sense of like spiritual unease. I mean, it is kind of true that everyone always thinks that like their era is like spiritually destitute. I mean, it could just be that humanity is becoming more and more spiritually destitute as like as time wears on, as human history wears on. I mean, with maybe not in a total straight line, but like in a general trend towards like spiritual destitution. But I feel like there is a parallel between the sort of moral decay, or really the Poshlost that Gogol was sort of observing in the 19th century and kind of portraying about the community, the Cossack community in the story through the sort of description of the church, and it's like the way that it is like just this ancient rotting ruin, and the way that it's portrayed in the movie, and that kind of, it speaks maybe to both times, like both the 1960s. That's true.
Actually, I mean, in the movie, kind of all the characters embody a certain Poshlost.
Yeah,
I would say, which is. I guess because we never defined it. I don't think we've ever defined it on an episode before, but that is like a literary concept from the turn of the century in Russia, which a lot of the people, like the generation after Gogol, would kind of embrace, which it roughly translates to a kind of a like a smug, self-satisfied, like materialistic vanity and a kind of personal corruption, I would say. You could like kind of, I mean, I think Nabokov transliterated it into English in the 20th century as Poshlost. Right. Though I think Poshlost is like cool enough. Like it still hits into the English to the English ear.
Talked about that in his book on Gogol.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. So he was talking about Gogol, where like Gogol is considered to be like one of the. In fact, I think that he even talked about it. Right. This is just a quote where he says, he used to say of me, this is about Pushkin, another famous Russian writer. He used to say of me that no other writer before me possessed the gift to expose so brightly life's Poshlost, to depict so powerfully the Poshlost of the poshlosty man.
I love that.
In such a way that everybody's eyes would be open wide to all the petty trivia that often escape our attention. So that's what Pushkin used to say about Gogol, according to Gogol, that he was, the most gifted of depicting the poshlosty man.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. Nabokov said Poshlost is not only the obviously trashy, but mainly the falsely important, the falsely beautiful, the falsely clever, the falsely attractive. A list of literary characters personifying Poshlost will include Polonius and the royal pair in Hamlet, Rodolphe and Homais from Madame Bovary, Laevsky in Chekhov's The Duel, Joyce's Marion Molly Bloom, young Block in Search of Lost Time, Anna Karenina's Husband, and Berg and War and Peace. Corny trash, vulgar cliches, philistinism in all its phases, imitations of imitations, bogus profundities, crude moronic and dishonest pseudo-literature, these are obvious examples. Now, if we want to pin down Poshlost in contemporary writing, we must look for it in Freudian symbolism, moth-eaten mythologies, social comment, humanistic messages, political allegories, over-concern with class or race, and the journalistic generalities we all know. Wow, so it's like the woke tads, basically.
Yeah.
Like
over-concern, well, also over-concern with class.
Nabokov, we should say, is a little bit like...
But, I mean, he does have a point. I mean, it's interesting, like, that a lot of these stories, like, Gogol's stories and Hoffman's stories, like, those were the material that Freud was, like, analyzing and, like, drawing all of his theories out of. And, like, they're all actually good. And, like, when you read it, like, you get kind of the idea, and, like, you can see how, like, Freud, like, the appeal of Freud's analysis. But, like, when people are, like, deliberately putting, like, Freudian symbolism into things, it's so trite and corny.
That's a good point.
I feel like, like Hoffman, the reason why I talked about it in the first episode is because I think he's such an interesting writer, and I would definitely say the same, like, Gogol's short stories are, really good, and they, we can see, like, even in the story that we've been reading some of, like, this sort of, the way that it, like, gives itself to, like, a Freudian reading, like, but, you can see how Freud would read this and, like, get his ideas from that. But then when people, like, took it to the second level and they're, like, reading everything through Freud and then, like, writing new things, like, okay, so now we have to have this all be about, like, the castration fear and, like, the illusory it's like, anyway,
No, a little reductive, basically.
Yeah, but there's definitely, like, these Cossacks definitely have a poshlosty element, like, to them, like a sort of banality. And I think that, Khoma Brut himself, like, as, like, this sort of philosopher, like, this sort of, superficial or hypocritical seminarian is, like, in a way, an example of these things. Yeah.
But he's really kind of like a moral dirtbag.
And
then his boss, like his head priest, is like venal and kind of smug and corrupt. And then the Cossack, and then all the other Cossacks, like just everybody involved in the story is kind of just like so poshlosty. Yeah. And, I think it's very interesting. Interesting concept, I think, that has legs outside of the Russian context, surprisingly enough. But anyway, so then, we come to like the final night, the third night.
Right. Yeah. And he's like, it's fine. Like, it's scary the first time, then it's not as scary, and then it's not scary at all.
He keeps saying, a Cossack is afraid of nothing. A Cossack is afraid of nothing. But he does get shit-faced. They have to like drag him in there. He like very drunkenly like etches out a sacred circle again, and then starts singing his prayers. And of course the girl sits up again in the coffin, begins cursing him. They're kind of going back and forth, but then she starts like summoning things. And then we get to the quite shocking finale of V.
Yeah.
I mean, it jumped out at me because up to this point, we've seen some fun practical effects, like, you know, a flying coffin, like bumping against a invisible magic circle.
The nighttime flight itself is a good
nighttime
effect,
flight.
But this is really
cool.
the coup de grace, for sure, the coup de théâtre.
For anybody that loves like old school horror movie practical effects, it truly is a feast of terror.
Yes,
that begins to unfurl. I swear to God, I'm going to recut the whole sequence with Hell in a Bucket playing over it. I already did it. It's hilarious.
Yeah.
But so like she starts summoning like demons, basically.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, these like ghostly, ghoulish goblins just start like popping up out of every orifice in the chapel.
Swarming everywhere.
Like different types
of every variety. Yeah.
Yeah, like literally little goblins with big ears, like zombie men, like men with like 4 eyes and like 2
clacking
noses.
Skeleton.
A bunch of clacking like Grateful Dead skeletons start coming out and like coming for him. And like there's like a rat. There's some kind of like rat creature like that also like hisses at him.
Yes.
And like they're crawling on the ceilings. Like they do some interesting camera angle effects. They have all these like little goblins like crawling around on the ceiling from everywhere. She also summons like, I forget if she summons the incubi or the succubi, but
she definitely, I think she mentions the succubi.
One of those two, yeah.
She is summoning like every manner of demon to come in. Yeah,
and they're just like he's like spinning around and like just being surrounded with all these ghouls, and but they can't get past the sacred circle. Yeah. So finally, she calls out the big guns as she summons V.
Yeah, she says, like, go get V. Bring V.
Bring V, which causes all the demons to tremble in fear.
Yeah.
And then out comes the eponymous monster of this film, V. Just like
and it's
slowly walks out.
Yeah, lumbering and like its footsteps go like boom, 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 like very loudly, like almost like impossibly loudly. Like it's just very weird, very uncanny. You know, it's just kind of like walking with these very, very heavy footsteps. It's kind of like a Jim Henson like monstrosity. It looks kind of like, I don't know, like Fraggle Rock from hell, like one of the like trolls from Fraggle Rock or something. But like,
V is kind of a gigantic troll kind of figure.
Yeah,
like he's hulking and thick. And
he's
kind of
big,
gigantic,
kind of rocky.
And rocky. And the chief characteristic, both in the story and the movie, is that he has these gigantic eyelids that go all the way to the floor.
Yes. Yeah.
And he demands that the goblins raise his eyelids so that he can cast his gaze upon Khoma. And I guess Khoma, like he knows that if like he can't look the witch in the eye, and he like can't look V in the eye, and that's the only thing keeping him safe.
This is an interesting part of the story as well. You know, I mean, really, you need to watch the movie to like get the point, like to get like what V looks like. But you know, in this vision, in the 1967 film vision, but the description of him is like still pretty good. You know, this is how it goes. So. He just kept crossing himself and reading prayers at random. At the same time, he heard the unclean powers flitting about him, all brushing him with the tips of their wings and repulsive tails. He did not have the courage to look at them closely. He only saw the whole wall occupied by a huge monster standing amidst its own tangled hair as if in a forest. Through the web of hair, 2 eyes stared horribly, the eyebrows raised slightly. Above it in the air, there was something like an immense bubble, with 1,000 tongs and scorpion stings reaching from its middle. Black earth hung on them in lumps. They all looked at him, searching, unable to see him, surrounded by the mysterious circle. And then she says, "Bring V! Go get V!" The words of the dead body rang out. And suddenly there was silence in the church. The wolves howling could be heard far away, and soon heavy footsteps rang out in the church. They did do that. With a sidelong glance, he saw them leading in some squat, hefty, splay-footed man. He was black earth all over. His earth-covered legs and arms stuck out like strong, sinewy roots. Heavily he trod, stumbling all the time. His long eyelids were lowered to the ground. With horror, Khoma noticed that the face on him was made of iron. He was brought in under the arms and put right in the place where Khoma stood. And then, so I actually was looking online, you know, about this movie, trying to find some interesting things about the story or about the film. And I found like some blog post by someone who was kind of, shitting on the story compared to some of Gogol's others. And they got an angry comment that was like, if you ask like a native speaker, like to name a quote from Gogol, like it won't be a quote from The Overcoat or anything like that. Like it will be this line, which is, "Lift my eyelids, I can't see." V said in a subterranean voice. And the entire host rushed to lift his eyelids. And then, both in the film and the story, I think in the movie he says, like, I can't look. I can't look. It seems like he kind of knows. But in the story, it's interesting because it says, like, an inner voice whispers to him, don't look. But he can't help himself. And he makes eye contact with V. No. And this is really interesting to me because they can't, like, see him. Like, the monsters can't, like, find where he is, really, or get to him. So when he sees V, that is actually what allows V to see him, which I find to be like very provocative, like as an idea, right? Like, so
it's interesting.
Yeah, once he like
don't go looking for the demon.
Yeah, it's kind of like the visor effect that Derrida talks about, like in Spectres of Marx, but it's sort of in reverse almost, where like only by seeing V can V see you, which I feel like, there definitely is like some kind of Freudian reading you could come up with where like, as Freud wrote about Hoffmann, like the eyes, like the fear of having your eyes cut out, or like the phallus and like, the eyes of the phallus. But I don't know. I feel like it's more interesting to think about like,
gazing into the abyss.
Yeah. The gaze itself, like vision, like, especially in the context like of a film, so then V is like, there he is, and points at him, and then they can all finally see him and penetrate the circle. And that's like V's whole function, basically. Yeah, is that like, he is the one who can see if he looks at him, which I guess he can't help but do so. Yeah, it's a very interesting idea that I think has a lot of like, that's one of those flourishes that I just think is like it's very rich and has like a lot to it. I feel like maybe the key to the whole story is like there in some way. But it's very mysterious, and there is. And a bit
more
the
ending after that, because then just as they all descend upon him and attack him, tear him apart, whatever, the rooster crows. But I guess the goblins are just so wrapped up in what they're doing, they miss the first rooster crow, and they hear the second one, and they all like rush back into their little goblin holes as the sunlight comes into the church, and some of them get trapped, like they're too slow, and they get trapped like trying to escape and just like frozen there.
Yeah,
and then the people come
in.
The
original story too. Like, they mentioned that like specifically that they were too busy like devouring him, and like then like the church. He even says like the church remained forever with monsters stuck in its doors and windows, overgrown with forests, roots, weeds, wild blackthorn, and no one now can find the path to it. No. So all those monsters like just got stuck in there, and like they didn't.
And the people find Khoma, and he's just lying in the circle, like seemingly dead, but also not like there. And I don't know if that's just the standards of Soviet cinema thing, but like there's no blood or gore or anything like that on him. He just seems to be like lifeless. It says here in the story, like after V says, "There he is," and all that were there fell upon the philosopher. Breathless, he crashed to the ground, and straightway the spirit flew out of him in terror. And then a cock crow rang out. So even that, like the spirit flew out of him in terror, that could mean that he died, like his soul flew out of him.
Yeah.
Or like the fear killed him somehow. That like
he died of fright. Yeah.
But it also says the spirit, not his spirit. So it's kind of ambiguous, right?
Yeah.
I don't know what again, with Russian,
he
the
gave
translation,
up the ghost, it seems like,
I don't know if they don't usually use articles, so it would probably say
That's
straight away spirit flew out of him.
Right, exactly. Like they.
But it probably means that it didn't say his spirit, because I feel like they would have translated it that way.
Yeah, maybe not. I'll see what the other because I didn't read it in Russian, but in the other translation, just he sank to the ground and died. So I feel like maybe it's idiomatic for dying, like gave up the ghost or something. But
but then both the movie has an interesting postscript.
Yeah,
where,
it does. I thought that was interesting. Yeah,
it
which isn't really in the story. Part of it is, but not the sort of the element of ambiguity around like the death, right?
Right. It cuts back to the monastery, where Khoma had attended, and there's two young seminarians who are kind of like working, kind of dawdling and like working on painting some icons like outside. And they kind of talk about like, damn, you hear about what happened to poor Khoma, man, like blah, blah, blah. And they kind of mention, you know, they say, hey, let's drink to his memory. But the other guy kind of expresses doubts that Khoma is really dead. And then a couple priests are approaching them and he's like, look, that could be him right now walking up to us. And instead it's just like their overseers being like, hey, you get back to work. And then they do. And that's the end.
You know, they say something interesting that is like really that is in the story. Like, you know, the first one, so I guess who were his old friends, these same old friends who he went to the cottage with on that fateful night that started all this. Yeah, and they're doing well in their seminary studies, you know, still kind of like goofing around, but also not horribly murdered by V. Yeah, that's another, you know, you mentioned the lack of the use of articles in Russian, which is something like, you know, like Gogol's story, the marriage or marriage, right? Like it's translated both ways. So V is actually translated as both V and the V. You know, you don't know if it's a proper name or if it's like, you know, his office or something, but because again, we don't really know what the V is. But anyway, so yeah, in the both in the story and the movie, Gorobets, one of them, says the reason why he died was because he was scared. You know, if he just wouldn't have been scared, then nothing would have happened to him, right? Like he even says, like in Kiev here, you know, all the old women in the marketplace are witches, but it's fine. Like, you know, you just got to not be afraid.
Yeah, exactly. Just like don't get tripped out about it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And don't give them the power to spook you.
And then, the other guy kind of raises that interesting idea that, like, you know, I don't know if he really died, which is interesting.
Because they just cut away from him lying on the floor. He could have just passed out. But, like, everyone, you know, talks about him like he's dead. Like, it's assumed that he's dead. It's just very odd. Yeah, it's an interesting sort of, like, a thing they added to an otherwise, like, pretty faithful adaptation. There's very few things that are, like, truly, like, you know, don't have a parallel in the short story. So I wonder if it's to kind of like emphasize the sort of unreliability of the narrator, maybe in a way that like the story might not be true at all, or might be like a representation of some reality, but not like correspond to it exactly. Yeah. But and just the weird vibe that like Khoma was almost like sacrificed by all these Cossacks, and everyone's like covering it. Like it implies by their conversation at the end of the movie that they never got his body back or something. Yeah. That like nobody saw his body. True. Like, no that is a good point. Right. And like, so they're just taking it on faith. They were told that he went out to this place and died, but they're like, who really knows, man? Like, you know, so it even brings up a kind of, like this unreliability about like the Orthodox, kind of the local Orthodox hierarchy, almost like being in on it maybe, and them just kind of being like, but like, don't worry about all that. Like, let's just, you know, things worked out for us, but it's very eerie. There definitely were in on it. Yeah, like, and you know, they were complicit. Definitely, they were just as much complicit in Khoma's death as he was in the death of the witch to begin with. You know, I mean, there's that one line I feel like that's like, a witch is a witch. You know, like, she was the chief's daughter, but the witch is a witch. You know, it's the same thing where it's like, you know what? I mean, Khoma even keeps saying throughout, like he has that very kind of, you know, so it goes philosophy. You know, where that's like kind of why he's described as a philosopher, right? Because he kind of has that. You know, they ask him at one point, actually, it's a little bit different in the movie and the story, like, because they ask, like, the Cossacks kind of ask, like, what do they teach you at the seminary? Books. Yeah. Like, do they teach you? They ask him, like, I'd like to know what they teach you at the seminary. The same as what the deacon reads in church or something else. They're like, do you have, like, secrets, you know? Yeah. No, that was interesting. I thought that, that definitely checks out for the Soviet era. It's like, because, you know, none of these people are literate back then. And, you know, he's basically saying like, like, do you guys have secrets in your books that you're not telling? I'd like to read those books. You know, I'd like to go to the seminary and stuff like that. Yeah. So it's like back when it's so easy to forget now that both in like Orthodox Christianity and in Catholicism, you know, a couple hundred years ago, even after the printing press was invented, like there was still such mass illiteracy among like peasants in Europe that you really would have to take their word for it a lot of the time. And you just don't, you got to take it on faith, basically.
Yeah.
Like what's even in the book.
Right.
And I don't know. I mean, did they, was this like kind of like a ritualistic revenge killing because they actually knew, was the Cossack father lying that, like, did she actually reveal the identity? Like, that's my murderer. Like, bring him here. And they're like, all right, we're going to torture him and, like, have my witch daughter, like, basically condemn his soul, like, eat his soul and, like, condemn it to hell. Because they don't actually seem that interested in, like, the whole thing about, oh, you need to pray for the repose of my daughter's soul definitely feels like a pretense to whatever their real reason is for sacrificing Khoma to V,
Yeah, he also, like, isn't remotely surprised when he comes to her, or, like, even offended when he comes to her and says, like, that she's had dealings with the devil. He doesn't
care. Yeah.
Yeah, he's like, well, obviously she wants you to, like, that's why she asked you here, so that you can pray for her soul.
Yeah. Everybody, everybody sins sometimes. Everybody makes a pact with the devil sometimes. What's the big deal? Like, just, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't seem to be fazed that she was, like, unrepentant and that she was in league with Satan and all this other stuff.
Кости моя, як сметошися, кости моя. Да не потопит меня буря водная, ниже, да не пожрет меня глубина, ниже свидетель. Исцели меня, Господи, исцели меня, Господи, Господи, исцели. Господи, опять несу ужасы твои. Господи, опять несу ужасы, и с ним отдаю. Да Господи, помилуй меня, Господи, воды животы, кровь споднесся тебе. Помилуйся, Господи, избави душу мою, спаси меня, ради милости твоей.
It might be helpful to go back and talk a little bit about the life and career of the original author of the story, Nikolai Vasilyevich Gogol. We just figured out. we looked up how to properly pronounce it. It's
still, like, up in the air. Literally in grad school, like, someone yelled at me that it was Gogol because I was saying Gogol, and I guess it's still affecting me because I can't believe that someone was so passionate, like, to yell that at me if it wasn't even true. I mean, I feel like listening to that pronunciation we found on YouTube of a Russian person saying it, I can see how, like, with an American accent, it could come out both ways, but I'm really, like, right now I'm having, like, a whole moment over this because literally, like, I've been living a lie for, like, all these years. Like,
wow.
Yeah, just goes to show, like, anyway.
Serious academics all agree.
Yeah, serious academics. I mean, it was another graduate student. She was, like, very worked up over it. And, like, I feel like she was mad at me about something else, but she was, like, taking the opportunity to call me, like, a pseudo-intellectual because I pronounced Gogol/Gogol wrong, but I guess she was wrong. Again, I don't know. I can't.
According
to
Google and Wikipedia, it is pronounced, well, as close as a English-speaking person could.
So I might keep saying Gogol, but I'll try to adjust. Now it sounds wrong to me because I had that experience. But anyway,
yeah. Well,
so
you got psyoped.
We'll see what our listeners say. They'll probably, now that we've had this conversation, we'll probably get their opinions. So
yes.
About how to say Gogol/Gogol. Gogol, maybe it's a happy medium. Anyway,
there is.
So he's definitely
Nikolai
an interesting
Gogol.
Figure. You kind of touched on him a bit, like very greatly revered Russian writer. I think like Dostoevsky said something like, we all like all of like the sort of 19th century like Russian like realist quote unquote tradition, or like the sort of that golden era of Russian literature that like they all came out of Gogol's overcoat. It was a big turning point moment, was that. And I think we mentioned a little bit before how V was something that he wrote before that. That was in his like sort of more famous collection of Petersburg tales that are set in St. Petersburg. And it's like very iconic. If anyone knows Master Margarita by Bulgakov, that definitely has a Gogol vibe. It's interesting, actually, like I was thinking, during the break about that line from the end when whoever it is, the other seminarian, who says that, like, there's witches all over here in the marketplace in Kiev, which is, like, interesting because, like, in these classic horror movie setups, like, or the classic sort of analyses of these types of films, or even of Dracula, it's sort of the juxtaposition of the city, the sort of rational world of the city, and the irrational world of the countryside. But that's kind of a repudiation of that in a way, because it's the idea that there is this sort of irrationality like lurking under the surface. Like every old woman in the marketplace here in Kiev is actually a witch, but like we just don't sweat it like so much.
The original ghosts of Kiev.
Yeah, exactly. There's lots of ghosts of Kiev, but I mean, Petersburg Tales is like, his tales set in St. Petersburg are kind of, similar, where there is that kind of like strange element. But in a very different way. But he's someone who I think, it kind of does persist to the present day, and that in the same way that he's like would be claimed by both Russians and like Ukrainian nationalists, maybe. I feel like during the time he was claimed by people of different political tendencies. And, he had friends, I think, and supporters who were both like sort of westernizers and Slavophiles.
Yeah, as you mentioned earlier, that was kind of like one of the chief like dialectics of his day was this impulse between, which really is like, it recurs throughout Russian history. It recurs into the 20th century, definitely throughout the Soviet experience, and even to an extent today, where you see like Putler, basically, turning his back on the West, and charting like a more, as like Dugin would say, like a more Eurasian course, or identifying Russian civilization as very distinct and separate from European civilization, things like that.
No, I'm far from an expert like in Russian history, but I did take a bunch of classes in Russia, like with, Russian professors and, on various subjects like art history and cinema and, literature and things like that as part of my time at the Moscow Art Theater. But, not like acting or anything, but just like studying their dramaturgy. But that was like basically what they constantly were hammering home. I mean, I feel like it probably is like, if I extrapolate my knowledge like of other subjects, I feel like it probably is like a bit of an overblown cliche, but they still always constantly like hammered that point that like we're torn between East and West, like, we're constantly at war with ourselves because we can't figure out whether we're, of the East or of the West. And like that's, the main theme in Russian history. So
I'd say most prominently in Russian history, but it's something that almost cuts through the kind of histories of like all the Slavic cultures. Like to a lesser extent, like the Western Slavs, definitely because of their Catholicism, like Poles and Czechs and stuff, they're a little bit more copacetic with like considering themselves European. But at the same time, there's like their Slavicness and the deep roots that they share with like Ukrainians and Russians and South Slavs and stuff has always like, there's even been conflicts throughout basically. And I mean, a lot of like a lot of like the Polish anti-communist sentiment, for example, like in the 20th century, was this kind of based on this notion that Russia was like dragging Poland to like their like Eurasian Slavic hell, to like not be European anymore, and but they actually were Europeans, like stop it, you know, and stuff like that. And even with Ukraine today, like you see Ukraine is kind of struggling where like Western Ukrainians like want to be in the EU and like be banderites and
NATO, but
but like the Eastern Ukrainians in places like Donbass like identify much more naturally with just sort of like Russian culture in general and like a pan-Russian kind of identity. And so it's like it's always there. It does get blown up into a cliche a lot. A lot of
I mean, I
times.
feel like it's probably like maybe the Civil War in American history, or like the conflict between North and South, where like it doesn't explain everything and it's much more complex than that, but it's not false to say that that is like a very big theme in American history. Or maybe the
Yankee and Cowboy
thing.
Exactly. Like the idea of the Yankees feeling like they're in continuity with European civilization, and the Cowboys feeling a little bit more like almost like some like Western steppe Cossacks, feeling like they represent a break with European civilization. Yeah, and they're their own thing, and we shouldn't give a fuck about Europe. So, I mean, these fraught conceptions of identity are quite common, I would say. But in the Russian context, it often gets boiled down to this.
Yeah. And I mean, it definitely like how like a lot of the time these sort of like intellectualizations of like kind of historical, like in the sort of longue durée or whatever you want to call it, like where, you know, you're trying to create a grand narrative of like the history of a region or whatever, you know, that can get like very nitty gritty and kind of very, I don't know, like conscientious or circumspect. But like, it's definitely true that like in Gogol's time, like it was like a political thing where like people were of like, you know, very clear tendencies on one side or the other. Maybe not necessarily like, well, Gogol's an example of someone who was kind of in between, or like, I mean, we see this today with like the political divisions in the United States, right? Or in any country where like, you know, people sometimes are in between positions on different issues, but if you say like one thing in one direction, then like, you know, the people sympathetic with that or with the opposite will be like, what the fuck is your problem? And vice versa.
Dogpile you, cancel you.
Yeah, right. Like
a little bit of that did happen.
Yeah, you said gender real, you know, you call yourself a leftist, but you know, like,
no, exactly.
That kind of happened to Gogol in a way. Like,
it did. I mean, well, that's also the thing that does recur through a lot of Russian history, where there's often like, if you peek below the surface, these kind of pronouncements of like, oh, in this period they embraced Western and Westernization. In this period they embraced great Russian chauvinism. Is oftentimes it's like a much more complex mixture of the two things. Like one big example of that is the Soviet Union, because it ended up being perceived, particularly in the West, as this ultimate kind of like Eurasian, like Russian despotism kind of thing, particularly under Stalin. But at the same time, what was the basis of the entire like ideological apparatus of the Soviet Union was like a German Jew who wrote like, you know, Marx and Engels and stuff. And so, which is like inherently like a Western European idea, you know, a concept that came out of Western Europe.
Right, and you were even mentioning, like, before, when we were off the air, like, you were talking about how that actually was kind of relevant to the Soviet portrayal of Gogol, where they would say that he was the greatest Russian patriot, you know, he hated the West or whatever, but actually he was influenced by all of these, you know, people like Hoffman. So they kind of tried to obscure that aspect of him to like say that he was like uniquely Russian. Yeah,
totally. Yeah. We'll talk about that in a little bit, like the Soviet interpretation of Gogol and how it sort of shifted between, say, like the 1920s and the 1950s, usually on the side of like supporting and holding up Gogol as a great Russian writer. And so, I mean, we'll have to, sorry, anti-communist, but like they didn't just like hate everybody that was good at art and like ban them and like blah, blah, blah. No, they championed Gogol.
Stalin, I think, in a lot of ways, was a huge Gogol fan.
Stalin loved Gogol, and so did Lenin.
Yeah, there was, I mean, despite the idea that they like hated all art, I mean, one thing that is true is that although Gogol, I think, in his will, requested that there not be like a monument erected to him. There was, in fact, a monument erected to him by the Soviets, but originally they did one that was like too abstract, and Stalin allegedly got upset and demanded like a more socialist realist.
I did read that
statue.
Though I'm not sure if the first statue was built before or after the Russian Revolution. I forget exactly.
Yeah, it was like a whole thing where like they had to save the statue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he kind of went on a journey in terms of like what he meant to like the canon of Russian literature. But just to talk a little bit about like his life, because he's a guy who died relatively young. I mean, he died at age 42 in 1852. And you know, I think he, like he said, he was immensely influential to like subsequent generations of Russian writers in that kind of golden age. But I guess, you know, so he was born in a Ukrainian Cossack town, Sorochintsy, in the Poltava Governorate of the Russian Empire. I guess his father was a descendant of Ukrainian Cossacks who belonged to the petty gentry, and he was part of the what's called the left bank Ukrainian gentry, which somewhat confusingly, I don't know who decided to call it the left bank, but it's the eastern side of the Dnieper River, like immediately east of Kiev, where, you know, a lot of fighting, I think, is going on today.
Livo Berenzne. All right.
Yeah. So yeah, even though like I would consider the left bank to be like the western side of the, who knows what, who fucking cares?
Well, maps haven't always been like that, so.
You're right. Maybe not. Maybe they were looking south and thought, oh, this is the left side of the bank.
Exactly.
You know. Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of where he was from, and he grew up speaking Ukrainian and Russian, and I guess his dad was a bit of an amateur playwright and poet and stuff. So, you know, in 1820, he went to art school in Nezhin and started writing there. I guess he was not popular among his schoolmates, who called him their, quote, mysterious dwarf. But he found several, I don't know. Yeah,
mysterious dwarf.
I guess he developed a dark and secretive disposition marked by a painful self-consciousness and boundless ambition. Early, he developed a talent for mimicry, which, you know, I guess, I don't know, made him think about becoming an actor. So then he graduated school, went to St. Petersburg, full of vague but ambitious hopes, and he did write a poem, like a German romantic poem, Hans Kugelgarten.
Hans Kugelgarten.
He like self-published it under the pseudonym V. Alov and sent it to a bunch of magazines, but they almost universally derided it. So he bought all copies and destroyed them, swearing to never write poetry again.
Yeah, he was prone to like destroying his work.
Yes, he was.
I guess
he
did that a bunch of times.
Stormy individual.
Yeah, it's actually, if you like look at the two monuments of Gogol that we just mentioned, like it really does like reflect the two sort of sides of Gogol as like a figure. Like one of them really is like the sort of mysterious tortured dwarf in appearance, like he's like hunched over and he looks like so tormented, and the other one is like, you know, just standing up proudly, like it looks like a, you know, might as well be like a statue of like Stalin or Lenin, you know. He's got like he's just like very, very like standard statue.
So he started writing short stories, I guess, in the 1830s, and I guess the first one were like Ukrainian stories. Evenings on a Farm near Dikanka was his first, and it was a success. And then he published a volume called Mirgorod in 1835, and 2 volumes of miscellaneous prose
the one that
entitled
V was
Arabesques.
In. Mirgorod, that's the one that V was in.
Yeah. And then I don't know about arabesques, but, you know, I guess it's like some, you know.
I don't think that it actually had to do with the Arab world at all. I think that is just like a common sort of term for a type of design. Like, I guess,
like what is
in
it,
the
like
West
Arabian
they
Nights
called it.
Or something?
In the West they called it, no, it doesn't have to do with the 1001 Nights really, but in the West they called like an arabesque like any kind of design that had like entangling lines because it looked like Arabic writing. I think so. I think the idea was that like it was a bunch of different themes, and like so it was like all these kind of entangling lines,
like loosely interconnected short stories.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know if they're even interconnected, but like they were kind of like diverse. And like, yeah, like I don't know. So that was maybe the idea. So I think it was referring to the idea of the design of the arabesque, which was sort of inspired by maybe it was even inspired by like Islamic architecture, where you have certain like. But I think it was mostly like a reference to the calligraphy.
Okay. Yeah. Well. All right, so he gets some success off of these first like short story collections, and then I guess he develops a passion for Ukrainian Cossack history, and tried to obtain an appointment at the history department of St. Vladimir Imperial University of Kiev. Mm-hmm. That's right, I said Kiev. Despite the support of Aleksandr Pushkin and Sergei Uvarov, the Russian Minister of Education, the appointment was blocked by a bureaucrat on the grounds that Gogol was unqualified. His fictional story, Taras Bulba, based on the history of the Zaporozhian Cossacks, was the result of this phase in his interest, and I guess he became very good friends with historian and naturalist Mikhailo Maximovich around this time. And then he did become a professor at the University of St. Petersburg.
Yeah, that's a really funny story. But Taras Bulba, I think, does have like also like a supernatural element to it. Am I right? Or maybe
I think so.
I
think that's one of his most famous works, is Taras Bulba.
It was around the same kind of period.
It's about Cossacks going to war against Poland, actually.
So it's very funny that he was like interested in like kind of had like a dilettante interest in like the history of Cossacks. So then he managed to get himself like an academic appointment, and he just like said a bunch of bullshit and then like just got too depressed and like gave up.
This is the quote about his time there is as a professor of medieval history, he quote, he turned in a performance ludicrous enough to warrant satiric treatment in one of his own stories. After an introductory lecture made up of brilliant generalizations which the, quote, historian had prudently prepared and memorized, he gave up all pretense at erudition and teaching, missed 2 lectures out of 3, and when he did appear, muttered unintelligibly through his teeth. At the final examination, he sat in utter silence with a black handkerchief wrapped around his head, simulating a toothache, while another professor interrogated his students.
That's funny.
And then he resigned his chair the next year. So I guess that didn't work out so well for him.
Yes. So yeah, that was kind of like a turning point, I feel like, where he started to kind of get a bit scattered. I mean, he was, like, as you said, like a stormy personality, but he was totally unqualified to be a history scholar, despite the praise that he received for his, works previously. So then the nose, was the nose before or after that? I guess it was...
I think the nose, I forget. The
nose came out in 1836 again.
Oh, okay. So it's a little later. Right before that, he puts on a play of his comedy, The Government Inspector.
Yeah, Revizor. Right, which I mentioned, yeah.
Right. Yeah, which was, I guess, when he finally kind of believed in his own like literary vocation after that.
And those are still some of his most famous things, so it makes sense. But
yeah, and this is a weird little side note about it, because it was a violent satire of Russian provincial bureaucracy, but it was staged thanks only to the intervention of the Tsar, Nicholas I. So he actually, I guess Nicholas I was maybe on a little bit of a reformist liberal kick at the moment, and figured, why not, have a play that makes fun of the Russian provincial bureaucracy, I guess.
Right. Yeah, so I guess it actually was partially during the time that he was like a professor that he was writing a lot of this stuff. So he was kind of like phoning it in as an academic, working on his own things. But yeah, I don't know why he was so passionate about like being a scholar of medieval history when he like was totally not. I mean, I guess maybe it was a cushy gig in Imperial Russia.
Probably was, but it didn't work out for him. But then, and then he ended up like living abroad from 1836 to 1848, and spent time in Germany, Switzerland, and Paris. Hung out with like the kind of the Russian and Polish expat communities. Interesting, he became kind of friends with Adam Mickiewicz and Bogdan Zaleski. Adam Mickiewicz is like probably the most famous Polish poet.
Right.
Maybe of all time.
Yeah.
But definitely the 19th century. And I guess Bogdan
I remember
Zaleski,
reading some of his poems. He has like a weird kind of witchy type poem doesn't he? I think.
Interesting.
Or
I don't know.
Forefathers Eve, right? Yeah, there's some like weird, like witchery type stuff. Yeah, there's ghosts and stuff in Forefathers Eve. So yeah.
Interesting. I'm most familiar with Pontadiush, which has been made into movies and stuff. That was a big epic poem.
Yeah.
And he was like a romantic nationalist, basically during, we should say, the period of Polish partition, where Poland was just like split up between three empires, and not a country. It is funny that I guess in Taras Bulba he got some flack for actually he didn't get flack for his depictions of different ethnic groups in Taras Bulba. One author stated that the Yankel from Taras Bulba indeed became the archetypal Jew in Russian literature. Gogol painted him as supremely exploitative, cowardly, and repulsive, albeit capable of gratitude. And
there's a scene in Taras Bulba where Jews are thrown into a river, a scene where Taras Bulba visits the Jews and seeks their aid, and referenced by the narrative of the story that Jews are treated inhumanely. All right.
Fair for the time. His depiction of Poles, though, is kind of funnier and even kind of echoes with today. So, because this is right after the 1830 November uprising against Russian imperial rule in the heartland of Poland. And then after that, the Tsarist authorities began an official campaign of discrimination. Historian Lyudmila Gadagova said practically all of the Russian government, bureaucracy, and society were united in one outburst against the Poles. The phobia that gripped society gave a new powerful push to the Russian national solidarity movement. It was in this particular context that many of Russia's literary works and popular media at the time became hostile towards the Poles in accordance with the state policy, especially after the emergence of the pan-Slavist ideology, accusing them of betraying the, quote, Slavic family. No. Just like today, Ukraine is betraying the Slavic family. Yeah, I guess somebody said that, according to Professor Vilo Harley, I don't know, a Finnish person, Taras Bulba, published only 4 years after the rebellion, was a part of this anti-Polish propaganda effort. Inadvertently, Gogol's accomplishment became, quote, an anti-Polish novel of high literary merit, to say nothing about lesser writers. And they also note that, as in other Russian novels of the era, Turks are treated as barbaric and uncivilized compared to Europeans because of their nomadic nature. Okay. So, maybe not. We're seeing a little, a little Russian chauvinism kind of creep in to some of this stuff. But anyways, so he is living abroad, but maybe that changed after he was hanging out with Adam Mickiewicz. It seems like it'd be hard to be like a total anti-Pole if you're hanging out with like the most like nationalist romantic Polish poet of all time, right?
Yeah.
Maybe. And he did get a little bit sucked into like pan-Slavism, I think, a little bit later. But anyways, so yeah, I guess, he spent a lot of time in Rome. He developed an adoration for the city and read Italian literature, loved opera, and I guess Pushkin's death was had a strong impression on him.
Right, he obviously loved Pushkin.
He loved Pushkin. Who doesn't? So he wrote the satirical epic Dead Souls.
Yeah.
And The Portrait and Marriage, which we referenced, and The Overcoat, his most famous story from 1842.
Which also, this does have a ghost sighting in it, so there is a little bit of ooky spookery in it, but otherwise it's just like very kind of straightforward, like kind of bureaucratic tragedy.
Yeah.
A poshlosty man.
I
don't even know if I would call him a poshlosty man, but yeah, I would recommend it. It's a good story.
Yeah. So he got very famous at this point, and he came back to Russia to like publish Dead Souls in Russian and all this stuff. I guess he had planned Dead Souls to be, it was like the first part of a modern day counterpart to Dante's Divine Comedy.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah, that he wanted to write like more chapters of it or more installments of it.
Yes.
And it seems like his, for one, Dead Souls, like what it kind of refers to is like the institution of serfdom, because you would own like souls of serfs. That's like how serf ownership was denoted. Even on Wikipedia, it says to count serfs and people in general, the classifier soul was used. For example, 6 souls of serfs. The plot of the novel relies on dead souls, dead serfs, which are still accounted for in property registers.
Oh, and it also says, it says on another level, the title refers to the dead souls of Gogol's characters, all of which represent different aspects of Poshlost. a Russian noun rendered as commonplace vulgarity, moral and spiritual, with overtones of middle-class pretentiousness, fake significance, and philistinisms.
Yeah, I've never actually read The Dead Souls. I mean, people have just, like, lauded it to me, like, immensely. I have, like, some background knowledge of it, but I've never actually read, like, the whole thing. I guess, Chikhikov is supposed, the main character, Chikhikov, is supposed to be, like, you know, the big, like, the poshlosty man, like, par excellence. And, yeah, I guess they had to change the title to The Adventures of Chikhikov, like, when it first was published, because they didn't want to call it Dead Souls. I don't know. I guess maybe because of the connotations of...
Well, let me see. When was... I want to see exactly when serfdom was abolished in Russia. Or serfdom was abolished in Russia. 1861. So, yeah. So he's writing before the actual abolition of serfdom.
Yeah.
And he became known as, like, a very stinging, witty, satirical critic of both, like, the system of serfdom and just, like, the unseemly sides of Imperial Russia in general.
But, like, a big thrust, like, I think that part of the fact that part of the idea of developing Dead Souls, like, into a Purgatorio and a Paradiso was that he really felt driven to do something, like, positive, like, that he wanted to, like, present a positive model for people. You know, he felt kind of like that all of his work just, like, tore people down and showed them, like, what was bad about society, but, like, he felt, like, compelled to create something that would, like, you know, give a good example.
That's very interesting when you think about, like, the 20th century context in the Soviet Union, how I think some people would almost say that as, like, oh, that was, like, a bad thing about Soviet art, was that it was, like, trying to model positive virtues and not just be like, blah, like death, like sex, like destruction, you know, and, like, actually embody something, like, aspirational and, like, good, et cetera, et cetera. So this is, like, an early, maybe a very early iteration of trying to use art as, like, a positive weapon in that way. But he gets a little bit, like, derailed, I think, from that quest, right? We could say.
Well, it's interesting.
In the last few years of his life.
It's interesting, actually, because, okay, so a work of his, what really is a work of his, you know, like, was compiled by his and put together, like, as part of that kind of thing, was when I wonder if did he publish this before or after his, like, pilgrimage to Jerusalem and everything?
He went to Jerusalem in 1848.
Yeah. So did he publish his I'm trying to see if essays, selected passages. Yeah, okay. So he actually published it, like, a little bit before. He did not have a good time in Jerusalem, by the way. He, like, was not happy there, but you know, it's actually interesting because before that, like, in 1847, he published what I found to be a pretty interesting piece. I mean, like, I feel like if I read them back to back, like, you know, obviously his classic stories, like, you know, really stand out and everything, but this is a side of Gogol that, like, prior to doing the reading for this episode, like, I hadn't really seen so much, and it is an interesting work because, you know, as I said, it's called just selected passages from correspondence with friends, and he just published some letters of his that he had written to friends, especially A.P. Tolstoy, not to be confused with Leo Tolstoy. He was, like, a big statesman in Russia.
Were they from the same family though?
I don't know. I guess he was from the Oriol branch of the Tolstoy family. His father, Alexander Tolstoy, was the grandson of Count Pyotr Andreevich Tolstoy. Yeah, so I don't know.
The Tolstoys were, like, a big family.
Yeah,
like the one that the author came from.
He was from a branch of the Tolstoy family, but I'm not sure if he was from, the same branch.
We have, like, an Elkins situation going on here.
Yeah, it's a bit. Yeah, exactly. It's a two branched family. So I'm not sure, like, what his relationship to Leo Tolstoy was, like, actually. Or, like, what his, you know, genealogical
third or fourth cousin
was. Yeah, like, you know, probably somehow.
Yeah. Okay. But, so he was writing to this
guy who was a big. Actually, he was prominent in the siege of Warsaw. This guy. He commanded 2 battalions in the Battle of Praga, and he was awarded the Order of St. George by Catherine II. But anyway, so yeah, he was, I guess, a big correspondent of Gogol, and they had a bunch of, like, interests in common. In particular, like, you know, Christianity and Orthodoxy and all these things. But anyway, I found, you know, these texts to be very interesting. A lot of them, like, you know, are pretty, like, they can maybe go against the perception of Gogol that you might get, like, from undergrad or whatever, or, like, you know, the way Gogol is taught as like the great satirist who like tore everything down, because in this, he sort of comes off, you know, not to be reductionist, but he kind of comes off like a frothing reactionary who like loves the Tsar and like loves the Orthodox Church and everything. And like, you know, one of his like former supporters, famously Belinsky, who like kind of was one of the early big Gogol critics, he actually called him like a proponent of the knout, the apostle of ignorance, a champion of obscurantism, and a panegyrist of Tatar ways. A little bit racist against that.
Tatar ways. Wow.
Yeah. So in the introduction to this collection, you know, in English in this translation, not by Gogol, but by the translator or the editor, he says the responses to selected passages came quickly and they were even worse than Gogol had expected. As he wrote to Zhukovsky, the publication of my book burst forth exactly like a slap in the face of the public, a slap in the face of my friends, and finally a stouter slap in my face. While he felt that he might have made a fool of himself, still Gogol tried to explain. The opponents as well as the defenders are more or less in an uneasy state, and many are simply nonplussed as to where to turn, being able to make any apparently contradictory things harmonize because of the sharpness with which they were expressed. His sensitivity to criticism again overcame him, however, when he concluded his letter by suggesting that perhaps he had been guilty of those very sins that he had anathemized in his book. He says, I did not compile this book to anger the Belinskys, the Kraevskys, the Senkowskys. I was looking into the inside of Russia, not at literary society. But the censors, you know, they took out a lot of the particular advice that he put in, according to him. And he said that like ruined it or, you know, made it worse. So now the book consists of generalities instead of those people and subjects which should have stepped out before the readers. I alone stepped out on stage, exactly as if I were publishing my book in order to display myself. So, yeah, it was not well received.
So he does autofiction and gets canceled.
Exactly. Did autofiction, got canceled. People literally just, you know, this is kind of where, like, it's a kind of a Ted Kaczynski situation. I mean, not the best analogy, but a lot of people are like, oh, he lost it. Like, he's crazy. Like, he's
well, actually, you know
insane.
Yeah. You know what it really reminds me of is, like, people's reaction to, like, when Kanye dropped, like, Jesus is King.
Yes, it is.
And
very
started
much
saying
like
certain things about like
he needs
abortion's
to go to a mental
bad
institution.
and like what? Like take your meds, you motherfucker. Like
yeah, exactly. Yes, it is much more like that.
Saying like I didn't vote, but if I did, I would have voted for Trump. And it's like lock him up.
Lock him up in a mental institution. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like you know he had like a close relationship with an Orthodox priest, Matvey Alexandrovich Konstanovsky. Yeah, a starets. Yeah. And, you know, it's a little bit murky, like there might be some truth to it, but like the sort of traditional narrative is that like this guy was like kind of like a Rasputin like figure who was like, you know, manipulating Gogol and like driving him insane and like,
his
you know,
Dugin.
Yeah, exactly. His Dugin.
Well, yeah, he starts to kind of like, he starts to get spiral a little bit under this, you know, the cloud of cancellation and I don't know what happened to him on his pilgrimage to Jerusalem, but that also seemed to, I don't know, have some kind of effect on him. And of course, yes, the starets, Konstantinovsky. There's no citation here, but it's interesting, so I'll read it. Mm-hmm. That Konstantinovsky seems to have strengthened in Gogol the fear of perdition by insisting on the sinfulness of all his imaginative work. Exaggerated ascetic practices undermined his health, and he fell into a state of deep depression. On the night of February 24th, 1852, he burned some of his manuscripts, which contained most of the second part of Dead Souls. He explained this as a mistake, a practical joke played on him by the devil. Soon thereafter, he took to bed, refused all food, and died in great pain 9 days later.
No.
What? Yeah, I know, Jesus. So the devil plays a trick on... The devil psyops him into burning, like, his manuscripts, and then he, like, can't eat food anymore, and then just dies.
Yeah.
At the age of what? 42. Not that old.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm just reading some more of the intro to this volume. This guy kind of reflecting on the reception of it. And I kind of have like, in spite of or because of the great amount of time that Gogol spent abroad, he left Russia because of the reaction to the Inspector General in 1836 and did not return except for sojourns during the winter of 1839 and 40 and 1841 and 42 until 1848. He was convinced that true morality resided in his homeland, if only its spiritual reality could be made manifest. Easter Sunday meant not only going to church, but embracing one's brother like a brother. So far as Gogol was concerned, he had offered that embrace in selected passages, and he had been rejected in spite of all the humanitarian and philanthropic aspirations voiced by Westerners and by Russian Westernizers. For Gogol, the West was already obviously a failure from the point of view of the true God and true morality. He says in Easter Sunday, one of his essays, "One would think the 19th century would joyously celebrate this day, which is so much at the heart of its magnanimous and humanitarian movements. But on this day, as on a touchstone, you see how pale are all its Christian aspirations and how they are only in dreams and thoughts, not in deeds. If on this day one should embrace his brother as a brother, he does not embrace him. He is ready to embrace all humanity as his brother, and he does not embrace his brother. He is so separated from this humanity, for which he prepares such a magnanimous embrace, that one man who has insulted him, the one whom Christ commands him immediately to forgive, he does not embrace. Having been separated from humanity alone, clinging more conspicuously than others to the grievous sores of his spiritual unworthiness, more than all others demanding compassion for himself, he pushes him away and does not embrace him. He achieves an embrace only with those who have insulted him in nothing, with whom he has never come into conflict, whom he never knew, and into whose eyes he never even looked. This is the kind of embrace a man of the present century gives to all mankind, for he thinks of himself as a real humanitarian and a perfect Christian. A Christian! They have driven Christ into the street, into the leper house and hospitals, instead of summoning him into their homes, under their roofs, and they think they are Christians." Kind of applies. I think he's kind of got a point. Not only about the 19th century, but also I think about the 21st in a way.
Well,
But yeah.
I mean, I'm just scanning through right now the letter from V.G. Belinsky to Gogol in 1847,
right. Mm-hmm.
and it isn't. I didn't realize this, but they were good friends, and actually. I think Belinsky was the first Russian intellectual to publicly advocate for the economic theories of Karl Marx way back in the day.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so, I mean, this letter is he rips into him pretty fucking hard on, like, multiple levels that, you don't understand. You've been accustomed for so many years to look at Russia from your beautiful far away. And who does not know there is nothing easier than seeing things from a distance the way we want to see them? For in that beautiful far away, you live a life that is entirely alien to it. You live in and within yourself, or within a circle of the same mentality as your own that is powerless to resist your influence on it. Therefore, you fail to realize that Russia sees her salvation not in mysticism or asceticism or pietism, but in the successes of civilization, enlightenment, and humanity. What she needs is not sermons, she has heard enough of them, or prayers, she has repeated them too often, but the awakening in the people of a sense of their human dignity lost for so many centuries amid dirt and refuse. She needs rights and laws conforming not to the preaching of the church, but to common sense and justice, and their strictest possible observance, instead of which she presents the dire spectacle of a country where men traffic in men, without even having the excuse so insidiously exploited by the American plantation owners who claim that the Negro is not a man, a country where people call themselves not by names, but by nicknames such as Vanka, Vaska, Steshka, Palashka, a country where there are not only no guarantees for individuality, honor, and property, but even no police order, and where there is nothing but vast corporations of official thieves and robbers of various descriptions. The most vital national problems of Russia today are the abolition of serfdom and corporal punishment, and the strictest possible observance of at least those laws that already exist. This is even realized by the government itself, which is well aware of how the landowners treat their peasants and how many of the former are annually done away with by the latter, as is proved by its timid and abortive half-measures for the relief of the white Negroes and the comical substitution of the single lash knout by the Caddo three tails. Wow. So he likens the Russian peasantry to like African-American slaves, but says
they were basically slaves, not in the same way as chattel slavery, but for,
but without even having the excuse
in the different sense.
Without even having the excuse so insidiously exploited by the American plantation owners who claim the Negro is not a man. So they say you are a man, but we're going to enslave you anyways, basically. So he's saying it's even more vulgar in a certain kind of, maybe not more evil, but definitely like just contradictory
bad.
and
Definitely
bullshit.
bad.
Yeah. He goes on and on. Yeah, basically you don't know. You've lived outside of Russia for years, and your embrace of suddenly you want to be trad, and basically you're like running around with like J.D. Vance and Peter Thiel is kind of like what he's saying. And that it's interesting what he's saying Russia needs.
Yeah,
and
damn,
how
he really went in hard. And at such a
Yeah.
time, a great writer whose astonishingly artistic and deeply truthful verse have so powerfully contributed towards Russia's awareness of herself, enabling her as they did to take a look at herself as through in a mirror, publishes a book in which he teaches the barbarian landowner to make still more profits out of the peasants and to abuse them still more in the name of Christ and church. And would you expect me not to become indignant? Why, if you had made an attempt on my life, I could not have hated you more than I do for these disgraceful lines.
Wow.
Damn. Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah.
He really went in, yeah.
Interesting. So he says here that he's talking about how Russians are like an atheistic people by nature and stuff. So he says, sorry, this is just fascinating for like in the context also of like he says, proponent of the knout, apostle of ignorance, champion of obscurantism and Stygian darkness, panegyrist of Tartar morals. Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
What are you about? Look beneath your feet. You were standing on the brink of an abyss. That you base such teaching on the Orthodox Church I can understand. It has always served as the prop of the knout and the servant of despotism. But why have you mixed Christ up in it? What have you found in common between him and any church, least of all the Orthodox Church? He was the first to bring to people the teaching of freedom, equality, and brotherhood, and to set the seal of truth to that teaching by martyrdom. And this teaching was men's salvation only until it became organized in the church and took the principle of orthodoxy for its foundation. The church, on the other hand, was a hierarchy, consequently a champion of inequality, a flatterer of authority, an enemy and persecutor of brotherhood among men, and so it has remained to this day. But the meaning of Christ's message has been revealed by the philosophical movement of the preceding century, and that is why a man like Voltaire, who stamped out the fires of fanaticism and ignorance in Europe by ridicule, is, of course, more the Son of Christ, flesh of his flesh and bone of his bone, than all your priests, bishops, metropolitans, and patriarchs, Eastern or Western. Do you really mean to say you do not know that? Now it is not even a novelty to a schoolboy. Hence can it be that you, author of the Inspector General and Dead Souls, have in all sincerity from the bottom of your heart sung a hymn to the nefarious Russian clergy whom you rank immeasurably higher than the Catholic clergy? Let us assume that you do not know that the latter had once been something, while the former had never been anything but a servant and slave of the secular powers. But do you really mean to say you do not know that our clergy...
Interesting approach. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
He's like, hey. Yeah.
But do you really mean to say that you do not know that our clergy is held in universal contempt by Russian society and the Russian people? About whom do the Russian people tell dirty stories? Of the priest's wife, the priest's daughter, and the priest's farmhand. Does not the priest in Russia represent the embodiment of gluttony, avarice, servility, and shamelessness for all Russians? Poshlost. Do you mean to say you do not know all this? Strange. According to you, the Russian people is the most religious in the world. That is a lie. The basis of religiousness is pietism, reverence, fear of God, whereas the Russian man utters the name of the Lord while scratching himself somewhere. He says of the icon, if it works, pray to it. If it doesn't, it's good for covering pots. Now, this little section is nice. Next. Take a closer look and you will see that it is by nature a profoundly atheistic people. It still retains a good deal of superstition, but not a trace of religiousness. Superstition passes with the advances of civilization, but religiousness often keeps company with them too. We have a living example of this in France, where even today there are many sincere Catholics among enlightened and educated men, and where many people who have rejected Christianity still cling stubbornly to some sort of God. The Russian people is different. Mystic exaltation is not in its nature. It has too much common sense, a too lucid and positive mind, and therein, perhaps, lies the vastness of its historic destinies in the future. Religiousness has not even taken root among the clergy in it, since a few isolated and exceptional personalities, distinguished for such cold ascetic contemplation, prove nothing. But the majority of our clergy has always been distinguished for their fat bellies, scholastic pedantry, and savage ignorance. It is a shame to accuse it of religious intolerance and fanaticism. Instead, it could be praised for exemplary indifference in matters of faith. Religiosity among us appeared only in the schismatic sects, who formed such a contrast in spirit to the mass of the people, and who were numerically so insignificant in comparison with it. I shall not expatiate on your panegyric to the affectionate relations existing between the Russian people and its lords and masters. I shall say point blank that panegyric has met sympathy nowhere and has lowered you even in the eyes of the people who in other respects are very close to you in their views. As far as I am concerned, I leave it to your conscience to admire the divine beauty of the autocracy. It is both safe and profitable, but continue to admire it judiciously from your beautiful far away. At close quarters it is not so attractive and not so safe. I would remark but this. When a European, especially a Catholic, is seized with religious ardor, he becomes a denouncer of iniquitous authority, similar to the Hebrew prophets who denounced the iniquities of the great ones of the earth. We do quite the contrary. No sooner is a person, even a reputable person, afflicted with the malady that is known to psychiatrists as religiosa mania, then he begins to burn more incense to the earthly God than to the heavenly one, and so overshoots the mark in doing so, that the former would fain reward him for his slavish zeal, did he not perceive that he would thereby be compromising himself in society's eyes. What a rogue our fellow the Russian is. So damn
interesting.
Lot
you
going on there.
Definitely see like the westernizing streak in that, because like it's very interesting to me how, you know, regardless of like the larger argument, it's interesting to me how he's like saying, well, the Catholic Church like once was something, and like, you know, the Russian Orthodox Church is nothing, and like a European, when they become religious, they, you know, denounce like powerful tyrants. Whereas when Russians become religious, they, you know, like support tyranny. And
I mean, you could look at like today, like, you know, Putler's embrace of the Russian Orthodox Church.
I mean, I think that that's definitely a phenomenon that, like, despite the general sort of invective against like greedy hypocrites and like worldly powers in the general like Abrahamic religions, I don't know if you can necessarily say that any one culture is like more prone to what Belinsky's describing, because that definitely happens in Latin,
especially
Christianity,
Catholics.
And it happens in Islam as well.
Yeah, I mean, look at Adrian
I hate
Vermeule.
to say it,
like,
but it does. I mean, Vermeule's a great example. I mean, he's a monarchist, and yeah, like plenty of people who are Catholics like worship authority, despite, and many don't, you know, and I'm sure that there are many Orthodox Christians who aren't like that too. It is funny that like Gogol's like kind of a convertodox, although it's not really clear like how much he truly changed. Like Belinsky, I almost feel like some of his anger is at like, you know, like that he feels like kind of like deceived in some way, and like he's insisting
catfished a little bit.
He is insisting that like he changed, you know, whereas I'm not quite so sure that it was really a change so much as like he, like, you know, when he wrote that poem and everyone was like, this sucks, like he kind of switched to a different model of writing where he was like doing kind of personal essays like in the form of letters. And I think that that kind of like rubbed people like a very different way. But I'm not sure if like his, you know, if his perspective on the world, I mean, it's unclear. Like, you know, some people think that, you know,
was he always a kind
of past ideas, and some people think that he did have kind of a change. But the translator of that collection of his books said something interesting that was basically like, it is, I think, a distinct failure of the critical attitude that Gogol has only sporadically been listened to when he tried to speak for himself, as he did in selected passages. This has occurred, it seems to me, simply because he said things about himself and his work that most critics prefer not to believe. But surely what the author thinks he is saying is more to the point than what we choose him to say, T.S. Eliot notwithstanding. The reactions to selected passages in Gogol's day and since indicate which path critical opinion has chosen to take. In short, before we decide what Gogol's works signify, it behooves us to consider what Gogol thought they signified. So it is an interesting kind of take. He says, it was a straightforward communication he desired, the communication of one soul, as he might have put it, with another, rather than literary artistry. The desperate attempt of a man who felt lonely and misunderstood to make his ideas and feelings clear. In this sense, selected passages constitutes an intensely personal record, as Gogol was himself aware. In his letter to Belinsky of June 20th, 1847, commenting upon Belinsky's article which had appeared in The Contemporary, Gogol said that this was a book in which the personal spiritual history of man is involved, a man who is not like others, and in addition, a secretive man who has long lived within himself and suffered from the inability to express himself.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting.
I mean, it's like every single artist, like you could go down the list of people who, it's that phenomenon of like feeling feeling cheated and then looking back on an artist's like entire career.
Exactly.
And being like,
yeah.
Wait, like
and
were they
like,
crypto-fash the whole time? It's
yeah,
like when,
or like, you know, he
like
writes
Eric
this
Clapton
and then,
makes like an anti-lockdown song. Everyone's like, wait a minute, like,
yeah,
was he always right wing?
But then also like the people who didn't like his stories and like, you know, everyone was like praising them. They were like, I don't know, it fucked. Then like, you know, when this comes out, he's like, I told you, you know, like fuck Gogol, like I was right all along, you know. I mean, yeah, I mean, everyone has like delighted in that type of thing where like, you know, someone who everyone loved but they didn't like, you know, finally gets canceled, you know. Like it's a I feel like that's part of the phenomenon that happens to him with this as well. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to read like some of you know, his letters here. This is a kind of a short one that he actually writes about what we were kind of talking about, the sort of European versus Slavic issue. This is from a letter to L. It's unclear who L is, but controversies over our European and Slavic origins, which are already, as you say, elbowing their way into the salons, indicate only that we are beginning to awaken, but that we are still not completely awakened. There is therefore nothing astonishing if a lot of nonsense is recorded on both sides. All of these Slavists and Europeanizers, or old believers and new believers, or Orientalists and Westernizers, don't know what to say they are in reality, since at the moment they all appear to me to be caricatures of what they would like to be. All are speaking of two different sides of one and the same object, without speaking that there is neither controversy nor contradiction between them. One comes too close to the building, so that he sees only a part of it. The other goes too far away, so that while he sees the whole facade, he does not see the parts. It stands to reason that the truth is more on the side of the Slavists and Orientalists, because they see the whole facade and therefore speak of the principal thing and of the parts. But there is also truth on the side of the Europeanists and Westernizers, because they speak in a quite detailed and distinct manner of the wall which stands in front of their eyes. Their mistake is only that, because of the eaves and crowning of this wall, they do not see the summit of the entire building. I mean the cupola and everything above. Some advice may be given to both, to the one to endeavor to come closer, be it for an instant, to the other to retreat a few steps. But to this they will not agree, because a spirit of pride has seized them both. Each is persuaded that he is right once and for all, and that the other is a liar once and for all. There is more conceit on the side of the Slavists. They are boasters. Each imagines he has discovered America, and inflates his little seed into a turnip. It goes without anything that with their obstinate bragging they arm the Europeanists still more against them. Europeanists who have long been ready to retreat because they are beginning to perceive many things unperceived before, but they are stubborn, not wanting to concede to one with too many trumps. All these controversies would still be nothing if they stop with salons and journals. But the difficulty is that the two opposed opinions, both of which are so immature and vague, have already entered the heads of many civil servants. I have been told that it happens, especially in those activities where function and power are in two separate hands, that while one works completely in the European spirit, the other resolutely endeavors to follow the old Russian way, consolidating all the former procedures contrary to what his colleague contemplates. In such a way, affairs, like the subordinate officials themselves, come to grief, for they no longer know whom to heed. Further, since the two opinions, in spite of their sharpness, are not exactly defined, it is only the fisher in the troubled waters who profits, as they say. A swindler may now find opportunity under the mask of a Slavist or Europeanist, depending on what his superior wants, to get an advantageous post and promote his swindles, either as a champion of the old or as a champion of the new. In general, controversies are the kind of things to which intelligent people of a certain age ought never, meanwhile, to pay any attention. Let youth get out of it by itself. That's its affair. Believe me, it is normal and necessary these progressive brawlers scream to their heart's content, that the reasonable people may meanwhile reflect to their heart's content. Lend your ear to controversies, but do not meddle in them. The thought of the work which you desire to occupy yourself is full of good sense, and I even trust that you will accomplish it better than any other man of letters. I ask but one thing of you. Work at it, so far as possible, coolly and calmly. May God preserve you from temper and fever in the least of your expressions. Wrath is out of place above all in a matter of law, because it obscures and troubles it. Remember that you are a man who is not only not young, but even advanced in years. Let a young man be angry, at least in the eyes of some people he will be a picturesque spectacle. When an old man begins to get heated, he will simply become disgusting. Youth will bare its teeth and ridicule him. Be careful they do not say of you, hey, that dirty old man. All his life he's done nothing but sit on his behind, and how he's blaming others for not having done the same. From the lips of an old man there ought to issue words of goodwill and not of shouting controversy. A spirit of the purest gentleness and meekness ought to imbue the noble speeches of an old man, so that youth will find nothing to say to him in objection, feeling that its words would be unseemly and that gray hairs are already holy. Interesting. Yeah. So you can definitely see like the personal essay element in that. But yeah, I think that his sort of metaphor about the facade is very interesting, or like the sort of, it's kind of the thing of like the blind men and the elephant, you know, but I feel like that applies to not only the issue of like Russia and its identity, but also to the conception of Gogol himself.
Do we know anything else about his encounter with the devil that psyoped him into burning all of his papers?
I'm not sure if I know anything else about his encounter with the devil, except that, I mean, I think he got like heated up and like burned them. Yeah, I remember reading about it, but I'm not sure like what his actual like motive was in doing that. Was it an accident?
Apparently there's no citation.
I mean, Dead Souls does end in the middle of a sentence, but it's like still kind of debated whether it's supposed to end in the middle of a sentence.
I'm really not too sure. Yeah, where that came from, but I don't know. I think this guy just got lost, and I'd say he was like a patriotic socialist, but I guess not even a socialist.
He was definitely, yeah, I feel like he definitely wasn't a socialist. Yeah, there's some really interesting parts like in this where, you know, you can see why Belinsky was like so upset. Our poets have begun to see the higher meaning of the monarch clearly, perceiving that he must at the end inevitably be made all love. And in this way it will become evident to everyone that the sovereign is in the image of God, as our entire land knows. The importance of the sovereign in Europe is inevitably approaching this expression. Everything leads to it, so the sovereign's sublime divine love for their peoples may be evoked. We have already heard the wails of the suffering caused by the mental disease which almost every European is now infected, floundering about without himself knowing how and from whom the help may come. The least touch only aggravates his wounds. Any instrument, any aid devised by the mind is too coarse for him and brings no cure. These cries will finally be so intensified that the most insensitive hearts will burst with pity, and a wave of unprecedented compassion will evoke another wave of unprecedented love. Man will burn with a love for all humanity with which he has never before burned. No one of us individually can conceive such a love. It remains in ideas and thoughts, but not in actions. Only those can be completely penetrated by it on whom was imposed the inevitable law of loving everyone as one man. Loving every person in his empire, each man of every class and rank, and making them all, so to speak, a part of his own body, all his soul empathizing with it, grieving, sobbing, and praying all night for his suffering people. A sovereign acquires that omnipotent voice of love which alone can be intelligible to a sick humanity, and whose touch will not be cruel to its wounds, which alone can reconcile all classes and turn the nation into a harmonious orchestra. The people can only be completely cured when the monarch attains this highest meaning, to be on earth the image of him who is himself love. In Europe, it has not occurred to anyone to explain the sublime meaning of the monarch. The politicians, the legislators, and the lawyers have seen him from one side only, namely as the highest functionary of the state, put in this position by men, and they do not know how to behave with this power, how to show it in its own limitations, since, because of the constantly changing circumstances, it is sometimes necessary to enlarge his prerogatives, sometimes to restrict them. The sovereign and his people are therefore in a strange situation in regard to each other over there. They regard each other almost as though they were antagonists, each desiring to seize power at the expense of the other. Among us, the poets and not the legislators have clearly seen the lofty meaning of the monarchy. In trembling have they heard the will of God to establish it in Russia in its legitimate form. That is why their sounds always become biblical the moment the word czar escapes their lips. Even those of us who are not poets perceive this, because the pages of our history speak most manifestly of the will of Providence. It is in Russia that this power will achieve its complete and perfect form. Every event in our fatherland, beginning with the totter enslavement, is visibly aimed at the assemblage of power in the hands of one person, in order that he may have the strength to carry out that famous conversion of the whole into an empire, to shock everyone, and after having awakened everyone, to arm each of us with that critical insight into himself, without which it is impossible for a man to analyze himself, to judge himself, and to raise in himself the same struggle against ignorance and darkness that the Tsar had raised throughout the empire, so that later, when every man burns for that holy struggle, and all are conscious of their strength, there will be one above all who, torch in hand, will direct all his people like one soul toward the supreme light to which Russia cries out. All right.
Okay.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes,
right.
He goes on talking about how manifestly the will of God has shown the choice of the family of the Romanovs and not of another. How incomprehensible is this elevation to the throne of an adolescent unknown to all. There were in the ranks of the most ancient families, and besides, valorous men who had just saved their fatherland, Pojarsky, Trubetskoy, and princes descended in a direct line from Rurik. The vote left them aside without one dissenting voice. Not one dared to claim his rights. So, Providence.
That's interesting, because, I mean, God, it almost sounds like Dugan could have written.
It does.
Some of that,
I mean, it's interesting. Yeah, it is really interesting because like there's parts of it that I get in a way, like not the parts of like believing in like an absolutist reign, but I guess maybe in a way, I mean, I don't know if like any political system requires that to work. I almost feel like maybe it's hard to say.
I know
again, but certainly a monarchy does require that kind of mystical, for lack of a better word, or spiritual maybe dimension that he's talking about to work. And like maybe for all his imaginativeness, like he couldn't quite imagine he couldn't imagine like a change in form of government, but he imagined like sort of a emotional revolution that would like make the monarchy good rather than like overturning the monarchy.
Make him a love monarch.
Yeah, I mean honestly, like love is a very powerful like heuristic, like intellectually. One's like very hard to wrap your mind around, I feel like, but that's neither here nor there. Like, but I do think it is interesting that like, I mean, really like in certain ways, like it's in a different language, but is it really that different from like, the dictatorship of the proletariat? Like,
well, okay, I was just gonna bring that up.
Person who like loves all the people, like
yes,
what?
Yes. Well, okay. I think I was gonna say like if I were an anti-communist, but even still, I think a thought passed through my head, and I forget which episode. I know I've like brought this up before because I heard it on another like social like communist podcast like years ago, and I forget what book they were referencing, but it was talking about kind of the 1930s and the Stalin period, and they brought up something that was very interesting to me, and they were talking about the development of the so-called cult of personality around Stalin, which the liar Khrushchev told everybody about, and another lying Ukrainian. No, just kidding. And so like what they said was kind of fascinating, that it wasn't as, Westerners are wont to believe, that like evil Stalin like called everybody into his office and is like, you will make portrait of me and put it everywhere. People must love me. And then he plucked all the feathers off a chicken and told them that's how you create a perfect slave. Like, just, all that shit. Yeah. No, in fact, because I have read elsewhere that like Stalin was at various points almost like a little bit, not unlike Jerry Garcia, a little sussed out by this adoration of him as like a celebrity, but like it basically kind of went along with it. Like he didn't stop people from doing it.
Well, you know what? It's interesting. Yeah. Sorry. You.
Just to finish the thought here, because what I guess the sort of the political bureaucrats and functionaries and people in the Bolshevik Party like around Stalin had figured out that when they were going out to the countryside in particular, and they were doing their literacy campaigns, trying to teach everybody how to read, eventually they got to like 99% literacy, but that took a number of years. So kind of in the interim, what they ended up kind of saying is like, when we go out there kind of like a bunch of like bespectacled DSA nerds and are like, excuse me, sir, like, have you heard about like the German ideology and like the writings of Karl Marx?
Yeah.
And like, can I explain to you class struggle? Like that was not always the most immediately effective thing, especially when people needed to like go do their own reading to fully like grasp the essence of like Marxist theory and like, Bolshevik ideology. So what some like local functionaries started doing was they copied a practice from the Orthodox days of, having like religious processions where they would hold up icons of the Tsar and like icons of saints and things like that. And they started just replacing them with kind of iconic photos or illustrations of Lenin and Stalin. And that was very effective. Even though it wasn't explicitly religious, it was that you gave the people, who in many cases still, hadn't learned how to read, weren't properly educated, and, certainly maybe not exposed to like Western Enlightenment values or something. It gave them an embodiment of the dictatorship of the proletariat and the party and the country that you could sort of project your loyalty and your love onto. And then eventually over time, I think, there definitely were like panegyrics written during Stalin's lifetime that were like, oh, bountiful, like servant of the people, like carrier of the torch of like liberation, like the greatest, kindest man who's like his love. And I mean, even also like when we went to the DPRK, I think we're very vigilant about not like trying to do some stupid like Vice style dunking on them. But you got to admit, the iconography of particularly Kim Il-sung, but also Kim Jong-il, and I'm sure Kim Jong-un, they develop it over the last decade. But the way that like Kim Il-sung, his image is used in the DPRK, and the way they talk about him, right? What do they always emphasize about Kim Il-sung? His love for the people.
Right.
He loved
my second
like,
heart. Yeah. Right.
My second heart. They'd wear it, like all of our guides like wore the little pins, and they would say, yeah, like this is our second heart. And they would always talk about like, you know, like even when Kim Il-sung died, the legend, I remember they told us at the DMZ, was that like he was on a train and he was like feverishly working on like the final deal to like bring peace and like end the Korean War and like reunify Korea. And he was like, he was so close, but he was working so hard because he loved the people so much that he had a heart attack and like died. And all this stuff. So it was like
Kim Il-sung was like at one point like he was, I think, involved with Christian missionaries, right? Or he encountered them. Like
he was raised actually in deep irony. He was raised Presbyterian.
Yeah, I remember reading that like he had learned a lot about like organizing from like his experiences with like Christian missionaries.
And that was also that was
minister, right? Yeah,
that was extremely true of Mao as well.
Yeah,
Mao adopted certain ideas from Christian missionaries, and to make the rule of threes here. Stalin, of course, where was Stalin educated? Yeah, he was a seminarian.
I was reading
he was an Orthodox seminarian.
Exactly. I was reading about like it's like Stalin was in a way like a lot like Khoma from V. Like if you read about like his seminary studies, right? I mean, it wasn't in Ukraine, but you know, we all kind of hear about how he was like subversive or whatever. Like he was a dropout or whatever. But actually, like it's not really true. You know, I found this article called like Sergei and the Divinely Appointed Stalin, Theology and Ecclesiology and Church-State Relations in the Soviet Union in the lead up to the Cold War from 2018, which is kind of, you know, about how like what we kind of talked about, like that Stalin had to sort of make peace with the Orthodox Church like on the eve of World War II after, you know, taking a more aggressive stance toward them, right? So, so he went to like a Russian language seminary. His mother, like, you know, fervently wished that he became a priest. In fact, there's a funny part in this article about like how like even when she was dying, like in 1937, when he was like already, you know, like the premier of the Soviet Union and like he, you know, like had achieved all of this like stuff, she was still like, it's a shame that you didn't become a priest. But
well, maybe he did in a certain kind of
well, you know, in fact, he was known like as like the priest, like in his revolutionary circles, apparently. So this author writes, at the age of 15 in September 1894, Stalin arrived in the Georgian capital to begin the next stage of his study. Let us return to that institution and see what he and his fellow students studied. The earlier years included both secular and theological subjects, or quote-unquote secular and theological subjects. Russian philology and literature, secular history, mathematics, Latin, Greek, church Slavonic singing, Georgian Emeritan singing, biblical studies. By the final years, subjects became more theological: ecclesiastical history, liturgics, homiletics, comparative theology, moral theology, practical pastoral work, didactics, church history, church singing, various aspects of biblical studies. Some subjects may have changed, but throughout the Bible and church singing were constants. The young Stalin was noted by his teachers for his phenomenal memory, subtle intellect, and voracious reading, albeit not always about the prescribed variety. Not always at the prescribed variety. His marks varied over the years, ranging from high to low, especially from the middle years onwards when he became more involved with revolutionary groups. However, he was far from a dropout, as the copy of the final certificate, which Stalin requested 4 months after he left college, indicates. So, yeah, he studied at the Tiflis Theological Seminary, and he got excellent conduct, and he achieved the following results. Exegesis of the Holy Script, very good, 4. History of the Bible, very good, 4. Ecclesiastical history, good, 3. Homiletics, good. Liturgics, Russian literature, very good. History of Russian literature, very good. Logic, outstanding. Ecclesiastical singing, Slavic, outstanding. That's a 5. So he did pretty good. Psychology, very good, 4. Eastern literature, very good.
I'm starting to notice a pattern here. Because, you know, wasn't also Fidel Castro a Jesuit educated?
Maybe he was. I don't remember.
He was, definitely.
So, yeah, he read Greek. He knew intimately how the church itself worked. He knew all the intricacies of theology and the Bible. More than a decade
he was an Asiatic brute who
subjects.
didn't know he was stupid. All his writing sucked. Like, I love how Trotsky has like the John Brockman like take on Stalin. It's like, well, you know, he wrote this manuscript. It was so awful he couldn't get it published, and so he killed people. like it's really true. But I don't know if you actually go and read Stalin, he does have a preacher's sensibility in a certain type of way, because people always forget that his main function for like decades, he was a kind of a radical labor organizer, I think in some mines in Georgia and stuff. And he did plan at least one successful bank robbery in his day, but like he was a writer. He was like he would write articles like advocating, for various like Marxist positions and things like that. Yeah. And he was known. That was primarily kind of like his work. And he was a voracious reader and while he didn't have the most highfalutin style, I wouldn't say he was a bad writer by any means. In fact, there's something almost like refreshingly like very to the point about, he's very clear writer and like kind of no frills about this stuff.
And this author actually argues that like there's a lot of influence from like theological concepts in his like philosophy of communism, right? Like he compares like the idea of like the delay of communism to like the delay of the Parousia or Christ's return, like in some ways. This is probably the most interesting part. He talks about like kind of the anthropology, the sort of Marxist anthropology of Stalin. He says, while Russian Orthodoxy assumed that sin entailed a deformation or a distortion of human nature which could be restored through synergia, and while Pelagius argued in his 4th century debates with Augustine for the ability of human beings to do good works, Augustine stressed the reality and depth of sin and evil, and so much so that human beings could not undertake any work on their own. Marxists until Stalin took mostly a Pelagian line, assuming the inherent good of human beings once released from structures of exploitation and oppression. How does Stalin respond, especially in the moments of reflection during the tumultuous and highly creative 1930s? Human beings have hitherto unrealized potential for immense good, but also for evil never seen before. The emphasis on evil appears through the practice of criticism and self-criticism, the deployment of the terminology of sin, gerecht and sogresht, above all in the purges, eliminating the kulaks as a class and the Red Terror. Crucially, the texts move from the easier identification of evil as an external reality to internal evil, at both collective and individual levels. But this is only one side of the development of Marxist anthropology. The other is an intensification of the possibility of good. Here, Stackovenism, and with its emulation, tempo, and grit, provided the first glimpse of a new human nature which both realized the latency of workers and peasants and marked a new departure, let alone the quote-unquote affirmative action program with minority nationalities, or indeed the development of a quote-unquote domestic state in which the wholesale family and childcare became state concerns. And we must remember that Christianity, too, is not concerned with an eternal human nature with its transformation. In other words, the development of Marxist anthropology was not merely an Augustinian eruption, with a profound awareness of the intensity of depth of evil, but rather an intensification of both good and evil. Running through Stalin's thought is the profound sense that inherent goodness and the depth of evil should not be separated. They are necessarily connected. Without one, the other could not exist.
No.
Yeah, exactly.
He gave everybody free education, but he killed a bazillion people. No.
Yeah, and he says, he's, like, just to clarify, I think this is a good caveat. He says, I'm not suggesting Stalin was a Marxist with theology at the forefront of his mind. Not at all, for he was seeking ways to develop his primary focus on Marxism in light of new circumstances. But as he did so, theological structures were reshaped in novel ways, which one would expect given the complex relationship between Marxism and theology in Europe and indeed Russia, let alone Stalin's own theological education. The theological resonances I have summarized may have been subtle and subterranean in some cases, requiring a theological ear to discern them, but at other times they were overt. And then he kind of takes that into the sort of actual dialogue between Sergei himself, who also kind of had to do a lot of like theoretical or like intellectual work to try to like justify the churches. Like, there were some Orthodox who were like, the Soviets deserve to be attacked because they are godless. But Sergei had to basically say, I think he actually did literally say, while remaining Orthodox, we remember our duty to be citizens of the Union, not only out of fear, but also for conscience sake, as the apostle teaches us. And we hope that with God's help and with our common cooperation and support, we shall achieve this task. It is for a very good reason that the apostle admonishes us that in order to quietly and peacefully live in all godliness, we can either obey the legitimate authority or withdraw from society. None but armchair dreamers can think that such a vast institution as the Orthodox Church with its entire structural organization can exist peacefully in a country while walling itself off from the authauthorities. So,
some real politique,
to,
orthodoxy there.
Very much realpolitik.
But for real, yeah, why is it okay for like the Catholic Church to like operate and be all cozy with all these like capitalist countries and like Pinochet and like the Nazis and stuff? But then if the Orthodox people decide to like render unto Caesar with like the Soviet authorities, like they're corrupted, they're evil, instead of like that's probably the most base thing they ever did.
Like on the day of the invasion, you know, this author is talking about how like by the late 30s, the League of the Militant Godless began to wind down, with its publications ceasing by 1941 and its complete disbandment soon afterwards. The crucial turning point was the outbreak of the Second World War and the invasion of the Soviet Union by Hitler's Wehrmacht in 1941. Sergei was quick to act, publishing on the first day, June 1941 of the 22nd June 1941. He says, Orthodox Church has always shared the destiny of her people. Together with them, she has suffered in times of trouble and has been consoled by their successes. Nor will she abandon her people now. She gives heavenly blessing to their forthcoming heroic deeds.
That's very funny. I mean, it really adds some layers to the old adage that there ain't no atheists in foxholes. Right?
Yeah.
It's like when the Nazis came coming, who stepped up to the plate? Was it the League of Militant Atheists or was it the Orthodox?
No, they they fizzled out because they
fizzled out. There's no point.
Like, you know, at the it's interesting. Like, you know, they really went hard, and like, you know, the Muslims in Central Asia got their fair share of that too, like with unveiling campaigns and all that's like, you know, is sicko stuff. But it like ultimately it was a failure. Like it didn't work. There was like a, you know, I think there was a lot of like zeal and like, you know, revolutionary fervor where like a new world is coming. Like, but like that's, you know, I think people can get caught up in that type of thing, but who don't like kind of appreciate. So I feel like, you know, I think Gogol's kind of right in a way where like, you know, there might be like a way, you know, people need to see the whole building in a way where like, you know, some could be, I think, you know, Stalin in a way kind of maybe did see the whole building. And it's interesting that like, one of the most interesting things about this is that the idea of the mysterious retreat. Did you ever hear about that? Like,
no.
Like it was basically like a sort of, you know, it was almost like part of the cult of personality in some way, or like it was a common idea that like in 1941, you know, Stalin had gone on like a mysterious retreat and he had like reconciled with God. Like, this is from like, I just looked on the Google books and it says like on July 3rd, Stalin made his long-awaited appeal to the people. Comrades, citizens, brothers and sisters, warriors of the army and the fleet, I call upon you, my friends. That was how he began. Kind of the standard revolutionary form of address. Comrades, a Christian form of address. Brothers and sisters had reservists from his seminary days. Brothers and sisters, they, the people, were the ones who would have to defend the motherland. And in films at this time, church bells were sometimes heard. He declared the Great War a patriotic war, a holy war fought by the people against aggressors, like Tsar Alexander's war against the aggressor Napoleon. As if to support this idea, Hitler had launched his campaign on the anniversary of Napoleon's invasion. The analogy was bound to inspire hope. Yeah, in 1812, the Russians had retreated and even surrendered Moscow to the enemy, but they had emerged victorious. The party, too, of course, figured in his speech. He called on everyone to rally around the party of Lenin and Stalin, and no one saw anything strange in these words coming from Stalin himself. During his mysterious retreat, the ex-seminarist had decided to involve the aid of God, who he had rejected. He had already heard the Patriarch of Antioch had appealed to all Christians to come to Russia's aid.
And they still call it the Great Patriotic War to today.
Yeah, it's unclear what actually happened, but it is a persistent idea that
did he hear a voice?
Yeah, that he did hear some kind of voice. Yeah, he had he mysteriously kind of receded.
I remember hearing that like there was a brief period right when Barbarossa started where Stalin kind of like went into occultation for a little while and people were wondering like, oh, was he totally blindsided by this? And libs to this day will be like, he was such a bad leader. Like Russia would have beaten the Nazis twice as hard if it wasn't for Stalin. But like, shut the fuck up. Like, you don't know that. And like at the end of the day, I think they kind of marshaled every force they could. I think Stalin, one of his great strengths was, you know, he's definitely somebody that made mistakes.
Yes,
definitely made some mistakes.
For sure.
But was capable, and I guess that people would look at it as like, he's just such a cynical instrumentalist that like he's such a cynical pragmatist. He just changes his mind every 5 seconds. But I think it was like changing your mind based upon in a kind of a Marxist scientific way, like realizing that being an edgelord atheist was not the way to like victory. Basically, it was not the path towards communism. It was like super edgelord atheism. And I mean, I kind of agree with him on that. And of course, I can't blame the Bolsheviks for trying that, given the record of the Russian Orthodox Church, I mean, even Lenin said, I think we quoted it before, that he believed that religiosity and superstition would just sort of wither away gradually. But in the meantime, in this revolutionary period, do not harass the religious. Like, don't be edgy Reddit atheists, like going in and like telling them their God's fake and like and blowing up all their churches and stuff, because that can only be counterproductive. And like, you basically, it's like, if we're correct, the problem will go away on its own and stuff. Yeah. And so I think in the 30s, maybe out of a certain frustration and with the industrialization policies they had to roll out to prepare for the Nazi invasion, they took a stab at trying to smash a lot of religious traditions that they saw as, standing in the way, as being roadblocks to like the building of communism. And I mean, in some cases, like certainly in like, I remember hearing that the Ukrainian Orthodox priests were very fond of saying that, like, during a collectivization of farming, that like, oh, the Bolsheviks are going to come, they're going to make everybody sleep in a fucking tent with 30 people under a common blanket. You're going to have to share your wives, folks. And like told them they're all going to make you like, hail Satan and like renounce God and like be poly. And so everyone got like really, so there definitely were like Orthodox priests and stuff. And who knows, maybe some imams in Central Asia that were maybe, they had an adversarial relationship with.
Oh,
but I think
for
in the
sure.
big
there
picture,
were like sheikhs in Central Asia who were like, treated badly or like kind of like banished or sent away. Like especially during that fervent period, it was definitely like a time where it was definitely a time in the 30s. It was definitely a period where like there was not the best, like there were a lot of like fucked up or like very short-sighted and I mean fucked up is appropriate, like campaigns in Central Asia around Islam, even though it's more complicated than that. But I mean, I think that it's nuanced, but at the same time, like as a lot of these things are, I mean, you can see it like now, like in the reason, like it's not from nowhere that Muslims tend to have a negative association with the Soviet Union. That's the reason why. It wouldn't have to be that way. I mean,
no, for sure.
And it was partially due to China psyop and everything, but
sure.
Which.
But I think that's also part of the point, is that it didn't have to be that way, and like it doesn't have to be that way, like in the future or something like that. That was, hey, you know what? That was a understandable, but like overall, like a pretty clear miscalculation, a mistake, basically. That and so I think that it is it's really fascinating to watch these these Marxist communist countries start to kind of engage with the sort of like the psychological processes of religiosity, and both in the direct sense of like rehabilitating the Orthodox Church, but also in the kind of sublimated way of like Stalin as like the avatar of the people, or Kim Il-sung as the grandfather of the entire country, or something like that. And just noticing like how resilient and successful those strategies were, as like, interesting. And then that's why maybe it's such a shame that a certain politician had to go and lie so much in the 50s after they had built up this figure as the grandfather of like the nation. And then he just goes out, no, he's a piece of shit. Everything bad that ever happened was totally his fault. Like, tear down all his statues. He's a piece of shit. And everyone around the world now has to like piss on his grave. And it like shattered like the ideological and almost like spiritual cohesion, perhaps.
There's definitely like a bit of a black legend like around Stalin. Yeah, I mean, even though you could say there's a black legend around Spain, but doesn't make Spain super, doesn't mean that Spain didn't do anything wrong. But I think this is an interesting part from that essay that kind of like sums up a lot of this. Like, this is kind of from the conclusion. But he says, we should not be surprised that Sergei, Alexei, and other leaders often referred to Stalin as, quote unquote, deeply revered and beloved by all, and as a wise, divinely appointed leader who had become so through God's providence. Indeed, they express feelings of deep love and gratitude for his constant and wise attention to her, the church's needs. Was this nothing more than astute political maneuvering on both sides, or was it something more? We have only the texts and actions from which to piece together a possible picture, including rumors of a quote-unquote mysterious retreat undertaken by Stalin in 1941, as the Germans were rolling into the Soviet Union. As also the fact that the Russian Orthodox Church continues periodically to issue calendars bearing Stalin's image.
Wow, I mean they reconcile.
Yeah, I mean there's only 12 people you can have in a calendar. That's pretty. It's really something. Yeah,
it is something for
January
like the
2014 a Russian Orthodox Church slam for Stalin calendar.
Wait, they're still doing it?
Yeah, as recently as 2014, if I looked it up, there's a Radio Free Europe article which says Russian Orthodox Church slam for Stalin calendar.
Wow. Okay. Wow. Interesting.
Вознежися, смирихся, и изнемогу. Боже, помози мне, помощник мой, и избавитель мой, еси ты, Господи, не закосни. Утрудихся воздыханием моим. Эх, Господи, пролей на меня гнев Твой и ярость гнева Твоего, да постигнет я.
Заклинаю тебя кайдуком, пёсьим хвостом, нетопырем. Заклинаю тебя, заклинаю тебя, заклинаю. Ко мне, вурдалаки! Ко мне, упыри! Ко мне, вурдалаки! Приведите Вия! Ступайте! За Вием! Найди его! Найди его!
Поднимите мне веки. Не вижу.
Петух.
Вот там.
Бессмысленные люди!
we'll start to kind of wrap up here, but I do think it's worth mentioning the filmmaking team behind V in 1967.
Yershov was a director, right?
Yeah.
Yershov,
there are three of them, only one of whom has a Wikipedia profile, but kind of the most interesting of the three, who was a co-writer, I don't think he was a director, he was a co-writer, and I think designed a lot of the practical effects for the film, was Aleksandr Ptushko.
Yeah, right. He's one of the only, like, one of the most famous people associated with it. In that article that I was looking at earlier, he was like kind of mentioned as being like the main auteur behind this film.
Yeah, and I actually didn't know about this guy, but it's interesting. He is most commonly referred to, though some say misleadingly, as the Soviet Walt Disney.
Oh,
yeah.
Did he do like a lot of cartoons?
He did a lot of innovative work early on in the Soviet film industry with animation and also stop motion kind of stuff, and then moved into live action films a little bit later in his career. I think he died in 1973, and he was born in Luhansk. Very relevant to today. I guess people say it's erroneous to call him the Soviet Walt Disney because I guess his style of animation was a little different. They said he was more like Willis O'Brien or Ray Harryhausen.
Ray Harryhausen was like a special effects guy. I don't know who Willis O'Brien was. He was also like a stop motion pioneer, I guess.
Oh, he did King Kong and the Lost World.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense based on like what I saw in V. It wasn't, Space Jam. It was like more like King Kong type effects.
No, totally. And also we should say, unlike the American Walt Disney, he had the good sense to like clearly delineate genres when he decided to make like a spooky movie about witches and Satan. It was actually a movie for adults instead of laundering it into like a cool cartoon for kids.
Yeah, it's true. If Disney made that movie, it would have been like equally Freudian and like, except there would have been like a cute animal sidekick.
And like he would have like kissed the witch and like married her
horrifying.
At the end. Yeah.
It probably would have been more horrifying somehow. Like the sequence of like V coming in, don't give them any ideas.
No, true.
Yeah,
well,
if
actually,
Pixar is listening to this podcast, like we won't survive the next couple of years.
Yeah, if we haven't been like assassinated after the Disney episode comes out,
true.
That's still to be seen.
We're gonna
but actually, it's funny that you bring up like potential Hollywood adaptations in relation to Ptushko, because as a matter of fact, several of his movies were purchased and then released in English dubbed versions in the United States during the Cold War. Including, I think maybe I mentioned this once before because I found a little like side note in some article, and I thought, oh, that's maybe it was in 16 Maps of Hell or related to that. But basically, there was one of his big movies was Sadko, which I guess was a sci-fi film, and Roger Corman's film group released that in 1962 under the title "The Magic Voyage of Sinbad." So Corman's version reduced the total running time from 89 to 79 minutes, redubbed it into English.
Seen The Magic Voyage of Sinbad, not even realizing that it was a Soviet movie.
You might have, because I think actually The Magic Voyage of Sinbad was featured on Mystery Science Theater 3000.
Oh yeah, maybe that is. The
and
context.
kind of poked fun at, but and I guess it was like one of the more like memorable episodes of the classic series. But people do point out that like. They used three of his films: The Magic Voyage of Sinbad, The Sword and the Dragon, and The Day the Earth Froze, and episodes 422, 505, and 617. Yeah.
Wow. They slandered his name, even though Kevin Mercy, the voice of Tom Servo, professed a love for the breathtaking visceral style of Ptushko's films.
Well, exactly. But then, so basically, like they were making fun of the American re-edited and redubbed versions, which were a lot shittier. And also, I remember where I read this, because here's the other little factoid that's interesting. So for The Magic Voyage of Sinbad, aka Sadko, the script adapter that Roger Corman hired for this version of the film was a young Francis Ford Coppola. Yeah. So, and I remember reading an article because that was one of Francis Ford Coppola's like early jobs, was to edit. I don't know if he did any other Soviet sci-fi movies, but this is one he definitely did do. And that article mentioned that part of his job was to rewrite for the dubbing like certain dialogue that hinted too much at like class struggle or like quote unquote Soviet propaganda themes. And stuff like that. So they managed to like he had to go in and erase all of it for like the American version and just make it more of a generic sci-fi movie. So, you know, they say, you know, art and ideology are totally separate.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
No, yeah.
I see you,
want
Corman.
a political movie. Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know like what the process by which Roger Corman like got the rights to those Soviet movies, and just I don't know, Roger Corman's so interesting in general, and potentially I mean like kind of trained every big like new Hollywood director essentially. So this guy, I mean, he was a very big deal in the Soviet Union, and once again, like I guess they did have art that was groundbreaking and interesting, and it wasn't all just like
it was all horribly censored. Yeah, it was literally every single movie was about how great Stalin was. Yeah, and there's nothing interesting, nothing enjoyable. It was all hell, and they all just had to wait in a bread line, and they didn't have time to see a movie anyway. So
that's true. Really yeah, exactly. The other thing I thought was kind of interesting to bring up is I found an academic article from the 1950s about the Soviet interpretation of Gogol by Robert L. Strong Jr. It kind of goes. I mean, this would be early.
I'm, like just hearing from 1955, I'm like leery going into like a American Sovietologist from the 50s. But yeah, I am curious what he has to say.
I was very curious to see what he had to say. It's actually it's sort of like not that bad necessarily, but you know, it's also he's writing it in a kind of liminal period because this is a couple years after Stalin died, but before Khrushchev's lying secret speech in 1956 got out. So he even mentions kind of ominously at some point he quotes he quotes something great about, because he opens by talking about the 1952 centenary of Nikolai Gogol's death, which was widely observed throughout the Soviet Union. There were statues erected in various cities, new productions of his plays were staged, and even a number of films made their appearance. And there were a lot of great many biographical and critical studies of Gogol, and you know, his works were widely published and stuff. So he mentions a kind of an interesting anecdote of there was a huge meeting at the Bolshoi Theater, March 4th, 1952, for the anniversary.
Wow.
You know, with a huge like Gogol portrait, like, you know, like on stage and stuff. He says the principal speaker was Professor V.V. Ermolov. Interesting. The most notable of the present-day Gogolian authorities. He declared that Marx, Lenin, and Stalin all entertained a high opinion of Gogol, and that Chernyshevsky regarded him as an inspiration of critical realism. After linking the author to all that is best and most progressive in mankind, Ermolov concluded, quote, Gogol is our great ally in the struggle to oppose with ruthless satire all the forces of darkness and hatred, all the forces hostile to peace on earth. Other speakers followed, and among them were several foreign guests who asserted the popularity and influence of Gogol in their respective countries. At Gogol's grave and the Novodevichy Cemetery, the Soviet novelist Valentin Kitaev stressed the pertinence of Gogolian satire on the international scene. This speech culminated in, he says, the rather bizarre sentences of the following passage. But I actually think this is like some Gustavus Mayer's like fire. Kitaev said, in the world of money and gain, Gogol's characters still live and indeed have grown to monstrous proportions. Every day over, the, quote, voice of America, Klestakov broadcasts his blatant and stupid lies to the world. The corrupt Wall Street shark and speculator, Mr. Chichikov, combs the universe for dead souls selling at bargain prices. That uncouth beast, Pentagon General Sobakevich, smashes other people's furniture and steps on their toes. The Atlantic Nozdrev utters terrible noises, and the Roman Catholic Korobachka rides forth to the world market in her antediluvian Rolls Royce to make sure she got the right price for the believers she is selling for cannon fodder.
No, wow. Yeah, that's pretty good. I don't think it's bizarre at all. Well, I mean, maybe, but it's good.
But here's this is an extremely ominous passage, the sentence following it. Both tone and content here remind one of anti-American cartoons which appeared during this period in the Soviet magazine Krokodil. Such remarks seem quite dated now after recent cocktail parties and picnics. No, wait, why do they feel dated? This is only 1955. Why? Khrushchev is why. Khrushchev is why they seem quite peaceful coexistence, right? Okay, so on the same day, Pravda's lead editorial hailed Gogol as, quote, a patriot who foresaw the glorious future of his country, a herald of truth, a prosecutor of the vices of serfdom, a champion of the people's happiness, and a winged artist. The complicated and inconsistent aspects of Gogol's created life are somewhat begrudgingly admitted in the editorial, which hastens to add that these, quote, weaknesses and errors were merely incidental and not permanent. Concluding with a general pronouncement on Soviet literature, Pravda sounded one of the keynotes of the 1952 criticism, quote, our Soviet literature is the herald of a new communist morality. Its duty is to paint life in all its diversity and to unmask ruthlessly all that is stagnant, backward, and hostile to the people. We need our Gogols and Shchedrins. Such a claim, however, had not always been awarded Gogol by Soviet critics. In fact, this literary figure passed through a long and arduous rehabilitation before reaching his present high rank. And so he goes on to talk about like the journey that Gogol took basically through the early years of the Soviet Union and how like different, intellectuals and literary critics and party people kind of couched him, and all the stuff that we basically talked about earlier with like Belinsky's letter, like denouncing him as like a simping reactionary dumb, like in that letter where Belinsky sounds much more like the harbinger of the Soviet age than the way he makes Gogol sound.
Yes. I mean, especially as like an advocate of Marx, or, someone who advocated Marxism. Although I guess like he kind of drifted between like a bunch of different varieties of socialism throughout his career. Like I think he was into Saint-Simonism before that, and like French utopian socialism. I think on the whole, he was more of an advocate of like that type of utopian socialism than the more conventional Marxism. I mean, it's kind of like it's fucked up that in a way that he wrote that letter. Like, I'm trying to find letter. I'm trying to find Gogol's reply because I am curious like how he responded. Like, I mean, I like if they were truly friends, like that's really something. Like, I mean, I guess to say, I mean, he seems like he was very affected by that book. Yeah. I mean, this is
actually a little while you're looking that up, just a little fun fact about that letter. Apparently, like after it was published, they had a bunch of meetings, and a young Fyodor Dostoevsky read the letter publicly, like in support of Belinsky. And I believe that a bunch of them were arrested as a result of reading that letter. Wow. And that led to Dostoevsky being exiled to Siberia and also almost executed, but then like a mock execution, and they sent him off to Siberia. Remember, we went to Omsk years ago on the Trans-Siberian, and that was one of the only few things I think we were too lazy to go visit where Dostoevsky lived, but I think it's like a little museum, and like that's kind of the main thing about Omsk, because like, Dostoevsky got sent there. So like that was why I was reading the Belinsky letter. But then Dostoevsky also went off on a weird kind of like somewhat monarchist direction, and like was anti like having, but he was really eclectic. Like he was very anti-serfdom, but also believed like kind of in the Orthodox Church. And didn't believe in a constitution.
All these people were weird, for sure. Yes, they really were. Dostoevsky is like a whole other like can of worms. But he was definitely a weirdo, and he had like some very strange ideas that definitely evolved over, or maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm just like repeating bromides where like I've learned at least that there's like a different sort of perspective on Gogol, where some will say like, oh, he changed, but like others will say that actually his correspondence like confirms that he kind of was always like that, and he just like thought it was his like Orthodox Christian duty to critique the flaws of society. But when he
it is a really interesting question, because it, I mean, I think as a lot of these Soviet critics made great pains to like do, they wanted to like kind of emphasize the good in Gogol and like the positive aspects of his legacy. So it's an interesting question with artists, especially in today's age where there is a kind of ambient feeling of an artist has to represent the right values in their work. You know, like that's become very, maybe it's turning again now, but I feel like definitely in Hollywood over the last like 5 years or so, there's been a push towards maybe slightly more didactic, kind of moralistic, like wearing its political values on its sleeve kind of approaches to art and storytelling. I mean, I think you see it in the art world as well, and probably to some extent like in music. And at the same time, like, I mean, just as I could point out probably a bunch of examples of people having a quote correct political ideology producing totally stagnant, shitty art that doesn't resonate. In a weird way, sometimes you could like observe the flip side of maybe like a creator creates something that taps into certain truths, but their actual politics are kind of like insane and all over the place, and
yeah,
like
I think
sometimes
that's definitely
like fucked
true.
up.
I mean, I think that very few people can like, the domain of politics is like so vexed and like fraught and like amorphous, and like I don't even like really know like what is politics. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of like everything. True. It's just about like participation in society. To have like a theory of politics like that, you know, addresses itself to like the exigencies of the time in like a truly systematic way, like is so like difficult. And like I wouldn't, you know, I think we talked about on the show like in the past, like I would not put myself in the position of someone who has like, you know, political solutions. Like I would not want to be like a politician or whatever, like except insofar as like everything that you do in the public sphere is political, I guess. But
sure,
like I mean, yeah, it's
but also like as an artist, like what is the responsibility of an artist?
It's like it's weird like to have like a truly systematic political theory that like makes sense, like it's very hard, especially if you are like an artist or like maybe you like excel or produce like transcendent work in some area. I mean, I feel like that is true of like I mean, Gogol's an extreme example where like he wrote things that are like really great in one field, but then like, you know, maybe his politics. But you know, I think that like again, like he had a certain like artistic intuition that like maybe like the bare like sort of skeleton of what he was saying like seems crazy, but I also feel like, you know, and I feel that way about a bunch of people who like, you know, maybe the program in like its bones like is like weird, or like I think that like it's impractical, but it's like, you know, like it gets at something. I mean, ultimately, I feel like despite what Gogol might have said, like one person, it's unlikely that they will like be able to synthesize like in themselves like, you know, the answers to any given political situation. But like,
well, it's hard enough for somebody like Lenin to do it.
Yeah,
and he's not even tasked with creating interesting art. He like was just focused on politics. You know what I mean? So it's like an art like. I think that's like maybe too much to ask of any artist that they embody some kind of like perfectly cogent and clear.
I mean, I almost find myself thinking, I mean, no podcaster is like on the level of Gogol, but like I definitely find myself thinking of podcasters who like start out, you know, just like being like entertainment, but then like for whatever reason believe that they're like political leaders and then like become unbearable. So
or like comedians.
Comedians in general.
Yeah, I mean, going a little further back, the idea of somebody just telling jokes actually being like the flag bearer of like you know, progressive revolution kind of thing, and it's not exactly. But you know, at the same time, I mean, the Russian intelligentsia was, you know, very fiery and active, you know, around the time of Gogol's life. And I do think that, because the annoying thing is like when you start to talk about this subject in like today's context, what you often hear, and maybe kind of like the Joe Rogan side of the spectrum, or, you know, people like fellow travelers of that ilk, or people that are like very about like free speech, just saying like art has nothing to do with politics. Like art and politics should be separate. And it's like, I get what they're saying.
Ian Miles Chong tweet that's like, you probably think RoboCop is political. You're like, well,
that's why it's good. But it's like, I think it's like, it can be sometimes, I don't know, tricky to hold both these ideas in your head at the same time. But there's the idea that everything is political, and also art doesn't need to be like didactic didactically political, and it can even, I mean, sometimes a piece of a work of fiction or a piece of art or something can kind of like stand on its own, regardless of whether you know or don't know anything about the creator's politics. Like, you could draw something political from it without there being like an overt political message. It can sort of a depictive vibe. You know what I mean? Like, you know, we're all the way back in vibes discourse, but
yeah.
I think that Gogol presented a vibe of like kind of like the ubiquity of corruption, both moral and kind of in business and government and things like that, and like shadowy forces that were like conspiring to like, you know, destroy like young idealistic people.
And I think
Khoma.
vibes are very important. Like, you can't neglect vibes. And I think that
absolutely.
I think that like sometimes like people's attunement to vibes, like I haven't been able to find, like, I'm not sure like if, you know, if it was ever published or fully translated even into English, but, you know, I did find this one interesting passage where, you know, Gogol said to Belinsky in reply, you know, he says, "The age at hand is one of rational consciousness. It weighs everything, taking all sides into consideration. It would have us look about with the many-sided gaze of an elder and not show the hot impulsiveness of a knight of past times. We are children in the face of this age." And, you know, yeah, I mean, definitely had a point. I mean, like, I don't know, like, exactly how prescient that was. Like, I feel like the signs of the hour were, like, at hand as they are now. But, like, basically, I don't know, like, being, like, kind of in line with every, like, orthodox thought, you know, I guess ironically, it was in his own sort of clique, he defied orthodoxy by championing orthodoxy.
Literally.
But I guess, I mean, it's kind of a shame in a way. Like, I understand why Belinsky was like so fired up, like being a young Hegelian, like blah, blah, blah. I think it's a shame that like he loved his like artistic work so much, but like he wouldn't like think about like the positive, like, you know, look for something of value in selected passages. You know what I mean? Like, that maybe there were like some insights to be had, even if like, you know, it wasn't
overall perfect. I feel like
the sort of heroism.
My brother, you were misguided.
Yeah, even I feel like even in a way like the heroization of Gogol as like this great man who wrote like Government Inspector and like spoke to our times, like that kind of, you know, to see someone who was actually like imperfect or like had some like bad ideas or something. Like, I think the sort of disconnect between like the image of him and like the reality that maybe came into focus when he read that.
That's probably what really did him in, is that he was elevated on a pedestal to begin with as a great like liberal hero, and then he took this reactionary turn, and everyone's just like, you know, and they almost overcompensate by being like, we have to destroy you now because
but in a way,
you've been...
like, sorry, I don't mean to constantly interrupt you as, you know, or anything, but
no, it's all right.
But in a way, like, it kind of like they fed it to, because he did sort of have that in a way. He did have kind of like a exaggerated opinion of himself. I read this one article about his relationship with, what was the name of the guy? Aleksandr Ivanov, who was, you know, he's known for like one painting, which is a painting of Jesus. He was pretty good friends with Gogol. The Appearance of Christ Before the People is his famous painting, you know, also known as The Apparition of the Messiah. It's a good painting if you like figural art and all that haram stuff, but... You know, and in fact, I think Gogol is actually and Ivanov are actually both drawn into the painting.
Really?
Yeah, if you look right up if you look at the painting, like right in where Jesus is, like there's a guy kind of in an orange robe and who's kind of like looking to the left, like towards Jesus.
Oh yeah, that's Gogol. Like in the distance a little bit.
Yeah, right near Jesus.
Is that Gogol?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's supposed to be him.
That is an interesting painting.
Yeah, so they were pretty good friends, but like they both kind of had this theory like of how the poet needed to like excel. There's an article, what was the name of it? I'm trying to Aleksandr Ivanov and Nikolai Gogol, The Image and the Word in the Russian Tradition of Art as Prophecy. And I thought this was interesting because it kind of talks about like the importance of like sight in their theory of like prophecy and their kind of shared esoteric explorations. I'll just like read the abstract maybe. The pervasive Russian image of the writer as a prophetic figure is generally regarded as a verbal construct rooted and developed through literary tradition. And indeed, there are ample grounds to support such a view, as the image can be traced through a chain of texts from the late 18th century onwards, originating in the writings of Gavrila Dezavin and Mikhail Lomonosov. It first became widespread during the period after the Napoleonic Wars, leading up to the Decembrist uprising, when it flourished in the verse of Vasily Zhukovsky, Fedor Glinka, Wilhelm Kiekelbecker. Wow, okay. Kiekelbecker must have been, some Muslim lineage. But Nikolai Yazikov and Aleksandr Pushkin. Its subsequent metamorphosis from an agent of social and political change into a religious, theurgic force was largely facilitated by Nikolai Gogol. But at the same time, it reached Fyodor Dostoevsky, Vladimir Solovev, and the symbolists and their successors, and it had already become a canonical image, embodying an uncontested literary quote-unquote truth. And there's some other interesting things about, because some people have actually kind of speculated about the meaning of V as, some people say, it's Ukrainian slang for V, the word, that is. Some people say it's Ukrainian slang for, eyelashes or something like that. A lot of people say it derives from videt, the Russian word for seeing. This author talks about vision in that way a lot. A particular interest for our topic is the fact these two forms of prophetic experience are frequently combined, usually in a particular sequence. The prophetic vision is commonly followed by a verbal message. Indeed, the act of seeing is often presented as a preliminary stage, preparing the prophet to hear the voice of God. It is only after Jacob has seen the vision of a ladder connecting heaven and earth that he hears God speaking to him in his dream. Joseph first has two vivid dreams. His brother sheaves bow down to his sheaf, the sun, moon, and 11 stars all bow down to him, and then gives a verbal interpretation of what he has seen. When Moses first sees the burning bush, he says, "I will turn aside now and see this great sight, why the bush is not burnt." The narrative continues, and when the Lord saw that he turned, vayar, I guess in Hebrew, and he turned aside to see, God called out unto him into the midst of the bush and said, "Moses, Moses," and he said, "Here am I." In this last example, the emphasis is placed by the prophet on the purposeful act of seeing, while awake, not dreaming, as in the cases of Jacob and Joseph, that appears to be a necessary prelude to the direct verbal communication that follows from God. So, talks about this a fair amount. There's many echoes of this idea in Russian verse, the echoes of Isaiah in Pushkin's Prorok, or the prophet. Yeah, I found the verb to see and the analysis of it here, in the idea of prophecy, in the biblical tradition, to be interesting. He says the examples, if this is in fact a man and not a woman. Yeah, Pamela Davidson, so it is a she, sorry. So she says, these examples all appear to suggest the primacy of the visual element over the verbal with regard to the initiation of the prophetic state. Indeed, since the verb to see in Hebrew also carries the more general meaning of to perceive or to apprehend, it connects with the act of understanding, a link also suggested in Russian by the cognate verbs videt, to see, and vedet, to know. Accordingly, after hearing the Ten Commandments at Sinai, the Israelites can see the thunderings and the voice of the horn. Even a verbal communication can be seen in this sense, as in the word that Isaiah, the son of Amoz, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. However, the fact that the vision rarely stands on its own is almost invariably accompanied by a verbal communication indicates a need for a two-stage process, in which the vision first engages the attention of the prophet and deepens his understanding, but remains incomplete without the fuller verbal elucidation that follows. And, this is all kind of about, this sort of vision that Gogol and Ivanov had of themselves as being, prophets for, a new Russia, where, Ivanov would create this amazing image that he then would present to the Tsar, and then Gogol would, ascend to be the Tsar's sort of Dugin almost, and give him the poetic vision of what Russia's future had to be. But
this is a very John Train strategy.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm gonna take down Nicholas II. One song, one verse.
Yes. Yes, exactly. but so they were kind of caught up in this idea, and Gogol, he wrote some crazy letters where he's pretty mean to Ivanov and basically says the reason why your painting's going so slowly is because you're not Christian enough and things like that. So he was in a way caught up in this, but I almost feel the praise that he got from those liberal circles, I think sort of stoked that in him, because he was put in this position, and I get it in a way, you don't want to just tear people down and keep entertaining that, giving them what, that almost, it makes you suspicious of your own work that it's popular almost,
No,
like,
it is interesting that that spiritual advisor he had was able to play upon a kind of concept of like Christian guilt to make him feel bad for having written satires.
Yeah.
Like basically satirizing the state and all these institutions. He made him feel like it was sinful, like he was just filling the world with negativity. I could see that both as maybe some kind of like psyop to like neutralize Gogol, but also maybe kind of a general thing, like an interesting tension in creating art and especially being held up by these pro kind of Westernization type people as just the ultimate like badass critic, fearless satirist that slays with facts and logic and all this kind of stuff. And he really was always, I mean, maybe that's the thing that people maybe didn't understand and were so repulsed by, was there was always something a little more like liminal and spiritual, even with his original satire. It wasn't just kind of like a secular liberal argument against czardom or serfdom or something like that. He was getting at kind of deeper, murkier, spiritual kind of issues. And then maybe that led him into some like strange directions. Maybe he got a little lost in the foggy forest along the way and came out like supporting the you know,
as
hardcore
many
orthodoxy.
Like great artists and intellectuals do. Like generally, I feel like people who like rise that kind of like historical celebrated status, like a lot of them they're not all like one way, and they never like really fit into like a convenient or like comfortable box in a way. You know, there's things about them that you don't want to.
Yeah.
I think
they also go through phases. They're kind of, you know, they're like identity ramblers. Like they bounce to like different things. I mean, yeah, look at somebody like Bob Dylan, who we talked about recently, and like how he recoiled from being like a political like voice of a generation person, then kind of went through the 70s and then was like, I'm a born again Christian, and then like, wait a minute, no, I reconverted to Judaism, I'm a Zionist now, and then and then when he's like 70 years old is like, they killed Jack Kennedy, and you're just like, what? Now he's like a JFK pilled conspiracy theorist, like leftist again. Like you just can't. Like, I mean, without giving them all too much credit, I would say if you're going to give any sector of society or like occupation like a little bit of leeway to like say some dumb shit or get it wrong, like artists are probably, it kind of comes to the territory a little bit.
And the thing is, like, all people go through phases in a way, but I feel like everyone gets things wrong. It's just a matter of whether you're getting everything wrong at the same time as like your social circle, like getting the same things wrong at the same time. Because like if you're getting like, you know, you might even be right, like, but if they're all still wrong, the people like around you, like your supporters or, you know, your big fans, like, you know,
or maybe you might be wrong for like the right reason, if that makes sense. Like I feel like Kanye West freak out and kind of I won't even call it a freak out, but like his outburst of like basically saying like, yeah, I would have voted for Trump, or like I'm gonna go to the White House, or I'm gonna say that like the 14th Amendment like is a psyop or something. Like I don't think it was motivated by like him actually being like, I am a reactionary, like, you know, and like looking in the mirror and like identifying as such.
No,
but
I
like
think,
it was coming from a right place of like, I don't want to just go along with this kind of fake ass I'm with her kind of like stop Trump vibe that was going on like post 2016.
It is in a way similar, because I think more than anything, like part of what is contributing is like the phenomenon of celebrity like itself, like being like a public figure, where I think there is like an impetus to like say the right thing or the good thing, to like use your privilege, you know, for something good, you know. And I think that like maybe like people see like your art as being good, but like maybe you doubt that. Because I mean, for myself, I feel like if like everyone loved something that I was doing, then I would immediately become skeptical of it. And I think that's something that a lot of people have like experienced. A lot of people who have like had like a bunch of fame over something. Like not everyone. Some people are like, well, I'm great, but like I think a lot of people have that meltdown where they're like, everyone loved this, like what the fuck, like that is sus, you know, or like what
yeah, no, exactly. And then it almost like it's out of your control at that point, because people take from it what they want to take from it. And while you do have control like over the creation of the process, like you never have total control over how it's perceived. And I mean, that's something
Yeah, and perception, that brings back around to like, the connection of like perception and speech, like back to V itself, like there he is.
Isn't that interesting that Khoma is the thing that does him in at the end is they pull up the eyelids and V sees him, and then all the goblins can get him.
That he sees V, and that V
true.
The sort of the exchange of perception, right? Because V can't, even though the eyelids are pulled up, V can't see him until he ignores his inner voice his intuition and looks at V. Only then.
This is the ultimate.
Yeah.
Like, don't read the comment section. Don't listen to the haters.
You definitely don't read the comments section. Yeah, it's interesting to think about it in terms of like perception, or I feel like it becomes very interesting in the cinematic context because it ties in many ways like the act of viewing itself. But yeah, there's also. It just resonates so well with that idea of like prophecy that like Ivanov and Gogol came up with, like where there's sort of the word and the connection with speech, where like even like the indication almost, because then V like points at him and is like, there he is, and then all the ghoulies like they go get him. Yeah, exactly.
Eche Oma.
Yeah.
I guess that's what happened to him. Yeah. The djinn of celebrity was like floating around him, and then he looked at it, and then.
Yeah, it makes you very vulnerable. Just like, even Jesus himself, speaking of Christianity, he was tempted by Satan, right? With like,
yes, he was.
Once because he had, the adoration of certain people, he offered him like the rulership of the world and everything. Yeah,
and I guess he rejected. He burned all the devil, like tricked him.
Yeah, so exactly. I understand why he would like freak out and start burning, burn all of his manuscripts. Yeah, and like maybe felt the same way about himself that he felt about Ivanov, that he wasn't Christian enough, and that's why he was having trouble writing. I think that way sometimes. I always think that like if I'm having trouble writing, I'm like, Allah's mad at me. Like I need to pray more. It's a good instinct.
I'm sure it's been, I'm sure a lot of people lean on that. You got to do what you got to do also to get in the mood to write.
Hopefully I won't decide that like any of my dissertation is satanic and have to burn some of it because, gotta get that in. But, for better or for worse, trying to keep it on hook. But yeah.
Always keep it on hook. Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So I guess, we can leave it there. There's some books I didn't get to read about, like that I found about censorship in Soviet cinema that kind of try to take a more nuanced approach, because it is interesting. Yeah. The last thing I'll say is that I'm like so bummed out in a way that this is the only Soviet horror movie, because I feel like there is a lot of untapped potential there to basically like, because you could have a kind of Marxist-ly woke horror genre, I think, that could tap in, not to say that they didn't kind of somewhat get into it in other genres like sci-fi and things like that, but I think that they sort of like conceded the territory of the horror genre to like the Europeans, the Americans, the Japanese, etc. It's like everywhere, to the capitalist world, basically. And I think that part of that, though I don't think it's as hard-lined as like they just totally like banned anything superstitious, because there were obviously loopholes, as this movie, embodies. Yes. But I think that if they had been, I don't know, if people had been a little more into or tapped into the idea of like portraying kind of like capitalism as like a satanic force or a supernatural force or something like that, like dealing in those kind of metaphors, or like imperialism kind of being like a kind of supernatural force.
I've mentioned this movie before, but much later Soviet film, I think that might even been on like the cusp of the collapse of the Soviet Union, is the movie like Musulman. It's like just called like Muslim. Yeah. And there's like an amazing surreal like satanic pig like representing capitalism that like appears at one point in that movie. It's like amazing, but a very similar like kind of like horrifying surreal vibe to V. Yeah,
because just as proselytizing to those peasant villagers and needing like a big portrait of Stalin to like carry around, like I think for the general world audience, especially in capitalist countries, like even if we can technically read, it's not like we're doing a lot with it and we're all psyoped. into, never thinking about these things. So in a way, it's almost like creating a modern updated version of a folk tale to express like a greater truth about the more material world that we live in, and also try to embody abstractions in this like cinematic language. Like something like capitalism is so abstract and difficult to like really get somebody to like visualize it as an entity that kind of has almost like its own like autonomous logic that permeates everything. It's really, you can get into it if you read enough, Marx et al. But, a picture is worth 1,000 words, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think there's room there that maybe has like not been, for all the horror tropes that have been mined to death, I feel like that's one that still has not been mined as hard maybe as it could be.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, like this, kind of coming back around to the beginning, where I think that like the definition of like horror is like complex in a way, and I think that it's something. I mean, this could be a very long conversation, because I mean, I feel like we've said before that what's sort of a standout feature of like the horror genre as we kind of like reflexively defined it. I think we talked about like in our discussion of The Exorcist and other films in that vein. Like it's the genre through which like we kind of engage with that in the same way, just Freud's Uncanny, where he relates that to the like repressed beliefs of the primitive past or whatever, so like in the quote unquote secular society, this is like one of the primary mediums through which we engage, like the themes of like what is considered like in the sphere of religion, which really is like a very important and like inalienable human instinct, like, or is something that is like deeply ingrained in the way that human beings relate to the world. So I think that like, there was kind of under the Soviet Union, like there was kind of a tendency not to like think of Gogol as like a spiritual seeker, even though he like really, really was.
Or apologize for it, be like, look, like he wasn't perfect. He was a spiritual seeker, or stuff like that. But
yes, but I feel like that is like, it's a very important thing. I mean, there's many ways to engage it. Like you can also read like theological literature in the same way that you can read the Quran, in the same way that you can read like Marx and Lenin. But as you said, people don't necessarily do that. And I think that the popular literature, like whatever form it takes, has always been like a way to explore these ideas. So for sure, I think that even if you look at literature like in like hagiographies like old folk tales, like the things these are based, like they often like have elements that could be described as like horror. There was an article in the New Yorker that my mom sent me, and I didn't fully read it, and I'm not sure like if it was fictional entirely or if it was, it is fiction. But it was basically about like, it was like the life of a guy from Afghanistan, I think, who I only like glanced at it, who eventually like, immigrates to the United States, like in the form of all the jobs that he's had. And like his jobs when he was in Afghanistan, like his duties include like reciting verses from the Quran to dispel jinn, borrowing fruits from neighbors' orchards for sustenance and things like that, protecting sheep from bandits, witches, wolves, rapists, demons, so wow. It's I don't know what my point was with that. I was just thinking about like my mom and her text to me, but it's an important aspect of
important occupation.
An important occupation.
Protector from
gin protection. It's an important occupation, and it's something that we need to be in touch with. In conclusion, watch out for gin. I just totally forgot what my point was, but here you go.
Something about, I don't know, the politics of art or something. I forget.
I guess so. I guess like the popular literature is an important way to like engage with these things, and I was
using horror.
You can read theological literature too, but people, as you said, people tend not to. Horror is kind of the name that we give to these things, and like oftentimes, that was kind of my point, that like the religious domain is often concerned with those types of things that like are considered horror tropes, like the things that were mentioned, like witches, bandits, wolves.
For sure.
Exactly.
So, there's a natural
that's
overlap.
What I was getting at.
And even in a lot of horror stories, there's often like a moralistic dimension, or like it gestures at a religious thing, just as like religious stories often have an element of what we would classify as horror in them. There's a natural crossover there.
Yes.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, again, this is like a classic #, conversation. And we often say problematic things or things that people object to themselves. Like, I feel like maybe that's where some of my sympathy with Gogol, despite his like reactionary diatribes, like comes from, because I understand like when you're expressing religious sentiments and all of your leftist friends or your leftist fans are like, get mad at you. No offense to anybody. Yeah, that is not supposed to be a patronizing comment.
But
yeah,
I mean, for any of the edgy atheists listening, it's not just us that are taking religion seriously. It's also Comrade Stalin. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, he did take it seriously. Yes.
Maybe there would have been more development on this front.
He got a 5 in Slavonic singing. So
wow.
All right.
And those songs from the Stalin era fucking slap. Like the anthem. Come on.
Mm-hmm. True.
Don't tell me he didn't have input on, the glorious Soviet anthem.
There's more. Yeah, this is an interesting topic. It's interesting, like how that. But anyway, I won't even open any more cans of worms because we should stop. And also,
yeah. We'll return to I think
it's perennial theme. Yeah. Or
the art, religion,
Soviet witchcraft, like monster sort of themes. Like it's interesting, but anyway, yes. The opposition between the two, like and secularism and how, now's the time of monsters. Anyway,
it sure is.
Yeah,
it sure is. Now is the time of monsters, but it's also time to end the episode. So,
yeah.
Until next time, dear listeners, stay vigilant.
Peace.
Склонил голову.